Hello, my spookies, and happy Independence Day to those in the US of A. Today, whether you're out and about in the hot sun, having a hot dog and watching the fireworks go off, or you're just hanging out, maybe in the air conditioning, keeping cool, don't you worry. We're here to help things stay chilling while giving you those summer spooky vibes that I know you dig. So kick back, relax, and enjoy 7 tales of summer fun and fury from the deep, dark depths of the weekly Spooky Vault. Something for everyone in this marathon of madness. So, without further ado, get yourself some sunscreen and a drink as cold as your blood as we begin with our first story. The Spirit of Langley Pond by Charles Campbell. Summer, 1981. Elena Ann Sanders swam for all she was worth. She could hear the echo of her mother's sentiment in her mind. Don't get into any trouble. Call me if you need me to come get you. No questions asked. Elena wished she had listened to her mother. Instead, it was nearly midnight, and she was swimming for her life to shore. Elena was beginning to think she was going to make it. She was going to see her mother again. The crack of a gunshot was the last sound Elena heard before the darkness of the water claimed her. Langley Pond was going to be her grave. Summer, 2021. Langley Pond had changed quite a bit in the last 40 years. Being billed as the largest pond in North America, it was nearly the size of a lake. No longer were clay mudslides used as makeshift boat ramps. Now, there were full-fledged paved boat ramps descending into the water. There were designated picnic areas spread around the shoreline along with a few cabins that were rented nearly every weekend. It was almost 10 o'clock at night, and the humidity of the day still hung in the air. Brianna Turner glanced at her cell phone. It was 82 degrees. Ugh, I can't believe how hot it is, Brianna said. She peeled a strand of sweat-stuck hair from her forehead and grinned at her boyfriend, Andy Spires. Andy smiled back and said, "Yeah, it was over 100 today. Thought we might get a little relief by being near the water and all. Guess not. At least we have the cabin with the window unit. That's a plus." "You're right. That's a plus," Brianna agreed. They both turned toward the woods when they heard snapping twigs and shuffling feet. "Hey, Frog, y'all catch anything?" Andy asked when he saw Frog Spradley and his girl of the week, Jenny Coggins, clear the tree line into their sight. "Had a few nibbles, but nothing big. Threw 'em all back," Frog said. Jenny smiled, but she didn't look all that happy to be traipsing through the woods. "Good thing we brought beanie weenies then," Andy said. Jenny gave him the "you can't be serious" look, and Frog replied, "Damn, man, you are a lifesaver. Beanie weenies are the shit. I thought I'd have to break out the Vienna sausages and saltine crackers." "Hey, Jenny, you want to go in the cabin and cool off?" Brianna asked. "Yes," Jenny shouted. It was hot, she was sticky, and if this excursion with Frog taught her anything, she was definitely an inside girl. The boys watched as the girls walked into the cabin. "Okay, Frog, where'd you find that one?" Andy asked. Frog gave him a sneaky smile and sheepishly shrugged his shoulders. "Come on, man. I don't recognize her. She ain't one of your usual valley honeys." "She's from Martinez," Frog whispered. "Why are you whispering? She can't hear us out here. What in the world were you doing in Martinez? And how'd you get her? She looks too sophisticated to be stomping around Langley Pond." especially with you. The Prince of the Valley. She don't know nothing about the valley, does she? Andy asked. Well, she does now. I told her about the Spirit of Langley Pond, Frog replied. You didn't. And she hasn't left screaming? Not yet. Maybe it's because her phone died while we were fishing. She seemed more interested in whatever was on Instagram or Facebook than catching a catfish. Inside the cabin. Oh my God, that AC feels fantastic, Jenny said, and stuck her face in front of the window unit. It was turned all the way up, and Jenny's sandy blonde hair blew behind her like she was riding on the back of a motorcycle. Yeah, it's the only cabin out here with one. Andy sprang for the extra $60, said it would be worth it to sleep in comfort, and he ain't wrong. It's sticky as hell outside. How long you and Frog been seeing each other? Oh, I just met him yesterday. Where are you from? You ain't from the valley. Valley? What's the valley? Jenny asked. You're in it, Brianna answered and continued. You know that main road you took to get here? The one that went through a bunch of little bitty towns? Yeah, Jenny replied, and turned to face Brianna. Brianna was grinning, and her brown eyes were gleaming. Jenny really paid attention to Brianna for the first time, and she had this country girl pretty thing going for her. She looked like she could be fun in the sack, but could kick your ass out of it if necessary. Well, that road is 421, and 421 is the valley. Rednecks for as far as the eye can see. And you got yourself what we call a valley prince. That right. Why is he a valley prince? He's a Spradley, and Spradleys have been around the valley for as long as anybody can remember. Everybody calls him Frog. I don't even know if that's his given name, but I know his daddy was called Frog, and his daddy's daddy was called Frog. They own several businesses in the valley. His brother Ricky owns Valley Video. His other brother Johnny owns Spradley's fill-in station in Langley. His sister Darnell, well, she owns a beauty shop in Gloverville named, can you guess? Spradley's Beauty Shop? Jenny asked as she shrugged her shoulders. Yep, nailed it. So if you're from the valley, you know who the Spradleys are. Oh, really? That's good to know. So what do you know about this spirit he was telling me about while we were fishing? He didn't tell you about the Spirit of Langley Pond. Please tell me he didn't try to scare you with that story. Brianna suppressed a chuckle. He did, and it did freak me out a bit. Is there any truth behind it? From what I've heard, these local legends start with a grain of truth somewhere, and that grain grows and gets exaggerated over the years. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Am I wrong? Should I be afraid of a ghost in the pond? Jenny asked. Brianna smiled and motioned for Jenny to take a seat in the living room. Yeah, I know about the grain that started the story. It was something that really happened about 40 years ago. It went something like this. Summer 1981. It was Friday morning, and Elena bid her mother farewell for the weekend. Her mother's voice issued a lifeline as Elena walked out the door to meet her boyfriend, Dustin Hines. Don't get into any trouble. Call me if you need me to come get you. No questions asked. Elena told her mother not to worry and that she would be home on Sunday night. Hey, babe, Dustin said as Elena hopped into his Ford pickup. She leaned over and gave Dustin a quick kiss before she pounded the dashboard, which meant it was time to burn rubber. Dustin pulled out of the driveway and beelined to Belvedere Clearwater Road. Finally! Elena shouted. She was ready to have a weekend alone with Dustin. They had been talking about it for the better part of 6 months. Elena leaned her head out of the open window to feel the wind in her face. Hey babe, watch out for telephone poles. You don't want to get your head knocked off. It would really, put a damper on the weekend, Dustin said as he tugged on Elena's arm. Okay, I'm just excited, that's all. I know it's just Langley Pond. Just Langley Pond? Just Langley Pond? You know it's the pride of the valley, Dustin said. He looked at Elena with his blue eyes, and he could see her melt, just a little. You're laying it on a little thick there, ain't ya? Everybody knows Richardson's Lake is the pride of the valley, she said, enamored with her man. I beg to differ. You can't put a boat on Richardson's Lake, and I really don't know how they can call that tiny mud puddle a lake anyway. Langley Pond should be a lake. I mean, it's as big as one. Speaking of boats, Elena interrupted, does your daddy still have that John boat at Langley Pond? He does, Dustin smiled. Trolling motor? In the back of the truck, Dustin answered. Sweet, Elena replied. The pair rode in silence for the next 9 minutes. Elena hopped out of the truck as soon as it rolled to a stop just inside the confines of Langley Pond. I can't wait to jump in the water, Elena screamed and shed her clothing as fast as she could, revealing her bathing suit underneath. Dang, girl, you ain't gonna wait for me to put up the tent? Dustin asked the air. Elena was already splashing in the water. Dustin set up the 2-person tent and pulled the trolling motor from the back of the truck. Elena swam to shore when she saw the tent was all set up and the trolling motor was attached to the John boat. Hey babe, we gonna do some night fishing? The bass should be popping top water plugs tonight, Elena said as she took a seat in the lawn chair set outside the tent. I reckon we can do that. Mama packed up some ham sandwiches in the small cooler and I got Pabst in the biggin. I love you, Dustin. Shut up, you do not. You just want me for my money, Dustin joked. The couple ate sandwiches, drank beer, let their food and drink settle before they made clumsy love in the tent. Elena fell asleep with Dustin's arms wrapped around her. She woke up 5 hours later, alone. Dustin? You outside? Elena asked as she rubbed her eyes and stretched. She shuffled out of the tent and heard the frogs croaking their night tunes. The crickets returned a symphony of their own. Dustin! Where you at? You know you can pee in front of me, Elena shouted. She looked around and was comforted that the truck was still parked in the same spot, so Dustin didn't decide to go on a midnight snack run and leave her out here all alone. But he didn't answer her, and that was a reason for concern until she saw the light from the flashlight out in the middle of the pond. The John boat wasn't there. That sorry sack of potatoes, Elena shouted. Dustin, get your ass back over here and pick me up. She hollered into the night toward the light of the boat. The light flashed in her direction, but the boat didn't move. Don't make me swim out there, Dustin. I swear I will, and I'll make so much noise that no fish is going to bite for the rest of the night. Don't test me. Elena was leaving playful and moving into pissed off. The light flashed in her direction once more, but the boat still did not move. Okay, I'm coming. Elena sloshed into the pond and began swimming toward the boat. The boat still didn't move. The longer she swam, the angrier she became. He better not dare ask for sex the rest of the trip, is what she was thinking. Not even a hand job. The light still shined like a beacon from a lonely lighthouse. Elena was about 30 yards away from the John boat when she realized something was very, very wrong. There was a figure standing in the center of the boat. A figure that was a mite bit shorter than her boyfriend. That was their John boat. But that wasn't Dustin. Elena swam a little closer to see if she could make out who it was standing in the boat, and screamed in horror when she saw what the man was holding in his left hand. It couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of joke. Her mind was telling her someone was just pranking her. The man in the boat swung his left arm up, around, and launched the severed head of Dustin Hines in Elena's direction. She waited what seemed like hours on the sound of the splash. And when the sound came, Elena turned around and swam for all she was worth. Elena felt as if bricks were weighing her down. The burning in her lungs felt like she inhaled lit gasoline. She could hear the echo of her mother's sentiment in her mind. "Don't get into any trouble. Call me if you need me to come get you. No questions asked." Elena wished that she had listened to her mother. Instead, she was swimming for her life to shore. Elena was beginning to think she was going to make it. She was going to see her mother again. The crack of a gunshot was the last sound Elena heard before the darkness of the water claimed her. Langley Pond was going to be her grave. Summer 2021. Jenny's face was flush when Brianna finished the story. "Was that true? What you told me?" she asked. "Pretty much. I don't know if that's exactly how the conversations went down, but the facts are Elena and Dustin went to Langley Pond. Dustin's head was chopped off. They found the body in the boat, and Elena had been shot in the head. It took them a while to find her body, though. Longer than it probably should have. They say her body was in the pond long enough for her spirit to be trapped here. Some people say they can hear splashing around and hollering sometimes. Me, I think it's just the bass having their late-night snacks. They can make quite a ruckus when they're attacking frogs, lizards, and whatnot. I wouldn't let it scare you too much, though." Brianna finished and patted Jenny on her hands. "Did they ever catch the guy that did it?" Jenny asked. "Well, that's the thing. They did. That's how we got this story that's been passed down for 40 years, but he was shot in the head with a long-range rifle as he was escorted to the courthouse. Let's just say the police didn't spend a lot of time looking for the killer of Billie Jean Morris. From what's been passed down, a lot of folks think it was set up that way. The police can turn a blind eye sometimes when it comes to valley justice, especially when it's a couple of local kids that were killed. Kids that everybody knew. Kids that everybody loved. There were some rumors that it was Elena's daddy or even Dustin's daddy. They were both avid hunters with rifles to do the job. They weren't even questioned. I don't blame either one of them if they killed Billie Jean. He deserved it," Brianna finished. Jenny looked at her in all seriousness and said, "What if Billie Jean didn't kill them? What if someone else did? And what if that someone else is still around?" Jenny asked, clearly working herself up into something that Brianna thought was silly. "Calm down, girl. It was Billie Jean. I know it was Billie Jean. It's a valley thing. You wouldn't understand. Now let's go see what those boys are up to." Frog was grinning from ear to ear as he saw the girls approach. Andy was downing another PBR. "I was beginning to worry about you two. You get your girl talk in?" Frog asked as he grabbed his own PBR. "Yeah, something like that," Brianna replied and winked at Jenny to let her know it was okay. It was just a stupid local legend. Nothing to worry about. "Frog, are we really having beanie weenies for dinner? I mean, I'd rather go to the store and grab some sandwich stuff. Maybe Brianna and I could run to the grocery store real quick. We'll get a bag of ice and some more of that beer y'all like." Frog was all set to disagree and force the beanie weenie supper, but when the B word came up, he changed his course of thinking. "I think that'd be okay. What do you think, Andy? The girls can go get the sandwich stuff and another case of beer. I'll contribute $10 for the cause," Frog said and pulled a crinkled bill from his well-weathered leather wallet. "Yeah, I reckon that'll be okay. Brianna, take her to the Bilo where Jimmy works. He'll let you buy the beer with no ID." Brianna rolled her eyes at Andy like she didn't already know that. She had bought beer at that Bilo since she was 14 years old. The Valley kids knew where to go without being ripped off. There was always the quick shop option where the owner would only sell the swill known as Milwaukee's Best for triple the labeled price to desperate teens. That's the only way he could get rid of the crap, and he had to carry it because it was such an under-the-table moneymaker for him. Any way he can stick it to the government and help raise the next generation of valley rats, the better for his valley pride and his pockets. Andy tossed the truck keys to Brianna. "Be careful, babe. Don't wreck my truck and don't get caught with that beer." Brianna gave him another eye roll and trotted to the driver's side. Jenny felt a wave of relief when Brianna started the engine and the cool air from the AC kissed her face. "Andy," Frog said with a wicked grin. "Yeah?" "I had Jenny going pretty good with the Spirit of Langley Pond. You want to have some fun and scare the girls when they get back?" "More Jenny than Brianna. I know she's tough to scare." "I don't know, man. That new girl might go off the deep end. I mean, you don't know her all that well, and it'll severely reduce your chances of playing hide the snake, if you catch my drift. It'll be more like a whack-a-mole," Andy replied and smiled. "I don't care," Frog began. "I don't think she's going to give it up anyway. May as well have some fun with her. She's creeped out over the ghost of Elena Sanders." "First, what did you have in mind? And second, if Brianna gets pissed, it's on you," Andy replied. "Look, while they're gone, I'm going to go to the edge of the woods over yonder." Frog pointed to the shoreline at his left. "You see that cluster of trees over there?" "Yeah?" "Well, I'm going to go over there behind them trees and start tossing some of the red bricks that Ricky put over in that clearing into the pond. He'll never miss 'em. He done forgot he put them out there. And check this out real quick. Give me a second." Frog ran to his car and Andy could hear him rustling before he came trotting back with a palm-sized speaker. "It's a Bluetooth, man. I'm going to play some Halloween screams out of this bad boy. It works right off my phone. And while you're doing all this shit, where am I supposed to tell them you are? Tell them I went to the other side of the pond to go gigging. Brianna will believe that. She knows how much I love to go gigging. And when she finds out that's a lie, then me and my right hand are going to be best friends for the rest of the trip." "I don't think so," Andy replied. "You have to take the fun out of everything, man. Look, I will tell you that I was going gigging and I'm going to disappear for a little while. Then you won't be lying and you can act like you're just as pissed as the girls. I suspect I'll be taking Jenny home after this stunt and you and Brianna will be all alone in the cabin." Frog grinned and poked his finger through the hole he made with his other hand. A smile ran across Andy's face. "Now that sounds like a better plan, my man. I know nothing, I see nothing, I hear nothing but the spirit of Elena Ann Sanders splashing and screaming in the water." "That's the spirit," Frog replied without realizing the pun. Darkness was closing in on the valley when Andy saw the lights of his truck coming down the path. "They're back!" he shouted, which sent Frog scurrying for the tree line. Brianna and Jenny were still laughing from their conversation on the trip back. "Hey girls, need a hand?" Andy walked toward them. "Where's Frog?" was the first question from Jenny's lips, and Brianna already had her doubting eyes looking around for the mischievous valley prince. "He'll be back directly. He went gigging on the other side of the pond." "What's gigging?" Jenny asked, thinking it was some made-up thing by these valley people. "He went to kill his namesake," Brianna answered. "Gigging is when you basically take a 3-pronged metal spear and go stab frogs with them. Don't worry, though. Frog isn't killing them entirely for fun. He'll cut the legs off and fry them up." "Ew! He's going to eat their legs?" Jenny couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Yeah, I'll probably eat some too. Andy, though, he's not much on frog legs, are you, babe?" Brianna asked. "Y'all can have that. If I eat a fried leg, it better have belonged to a chicken, that's all I'll say." "Did he say when he's coming back?" Jenny asked. "Well, with Frog you never can tell. If he starts sticking them left and right, it might be a while, but if he can't catch them, then he might not be gone so long." "Is he good at catching them?" Jenny asked. "Best in the valley," Brianna replied. "Oh," Jenny said. She thought that was a hell of a way to treat your date. Send her off to get your beer while you go kill frogs around the pond. Jenny made up her mind that Frog would have to take her home as soon as he got back. "Here's your beer," Brianna said, and pulled the case from the bed of the pickup. "It's still cold. Jenny and I are going to make ourselves a couple of sandwiches. You want a ham and cheese?" You know I do. Can you bring it back out here? I'm going to start a fire in the pit. It's 80-something degrees out, Andy. Do you really want to make it any hotter? I like to see the people in the flames, babe. I won't keep it lit all night. Alrighty then, go see your flame people. Come on, Jenny, I'm starving. The girls went into the cabin. Andy lit up the fire pit and waited to hear the first splash. Brianna came out 10 minutes later with Andy's sandwich wrapped in a paper towel. Did Frog really go gigging? Brianna asked. Andy truthfully answered. That's where he told me he was going, but you never know with Frog. He added that just to cover his ass for when the shit went down. All right, it's pretty dark out here now. You coming in soon? Yeah, I'll be in a little bit. I was trying to wait on Frog to get back. I'm surprised he didn't come running when he heard the beer truck, Andy said, already thinking of how fake mad he was going to be with Frog when the prank unfolded. Andy wondered if Frog would let him get a punch in just to completely exonerate himself from any involvement in his childish ploy. Just put that fire out before you come in. We don't want to be the ones to burn down the cabins. Roger that, Andy smiled and pursed his lips for a kiss. Brianna gave him a quick peck. 15 minutes passed and there was no splash, no sound from the area in which Frog disappeared. Andy was getting a little antsy as he stood from his chair, took another gulp of PBR, and turned toward the cabin. He could see the outline of the girls standing near the AC unit. Andy began walking toward the cabin when the first splash finally came. Ah, so it begins, Andy thought to himself. The girls didn't hear it, or if they did, it wasn't enough ruckus yet to make them come outside. Then there was a second splash, much louder than the first. He saw Brianna's head turn, but she didn't come outside. I guess third time's a charm, is what Andy thought. The third splash came, and it was much louder than the first two. This time, he saw Brianna move toward the door. Then came the scream. It was loud, shrill, and brief. Almost inhuman. It was a scream of severe pain. Brianna came bursting out the door. All right, Andy, tell Frog to cut the shit. Jenny's freaking the hell out in there. She's afraid to come out. Frog, cut the shit! Brianna hollered in the direction of the commotion. There were more splashes. They got louder and closer. Louder and closer. Then, the second scream. It was so loud, Andy was thinking that was one hell of a speaker Frog had brought. Andy and Brianna heard running, and it was coming toward them, very quickly. Frog emerged from the darkness, and his face was white as a sheet. Frog, you son of a Brianna began and then stopped. Her heart felt like it was going ba-boom out of her chest when she heard the next scream. This was no Bluetooth speaker. This was menacing and so full of pain. Damn, Frog, how are you doing that? Andy asked, still not getting it, actually impressed with his friend's skill. It's not me, Andy. It's Elena. And I pissed her off. Stop it, Frog. Take me home. I'm done with this shit, Jenny yelled. Her entire body was shaking. The poor girl was scared out of her mind. I think we all need to leave, Andy said as he realized his buddy wasn't joking. Andy kept calm. Let's just go. We'll come clean up our crap in the morning. There was another tremendous splash, and it was closer than any of the others. The rhythm was almost like thunder followed by lightning. A few seconds after the splash, the screech came. It was a sound of unmitigated pain. The four of them froze in place, and their mouths fell open, almost in unison, at what they saw next. The apparition of Elena was floating above the water just past the shoreline. The front of her head was busted wide open, and her eyes were contorted black pools that looked in opposite directions. She fell into the water with a loud kersplash, and slowly rose again. Her mouth opened wide, and this time the scream pierced them. The eardrums of all four of them were on the verge of exploding in their skulls. Hands went to cover ears on instinct, but it didn't matter. This scream moved through flesh and bone, through space and time. This was the scream of the dead trapped in her watery grave. It was a macabre dance of the dead in which Elena was forever trapped. Jenny was the first to speak when the screaming stopped. "She's not going to let us leave." Brianna looked at Andy, and they felt the same apprehension that Jenny spoke aloud. But Andy simply said, "Let's get the hell out of here." Andy and Brianna ran to the truck while Frog and Jenny ran to Frog's Mustang. Andy turned the key and heard the clicking sound associated with a dead battery. Frog did the same. Jenny was shaking in her seat. Brianna was already thinking that they would just book it to 421 on foot. It wasn't that far away, and once they were on that stretch of road, they would be home free. The wind suddenly picked up and the temperature dropped. The four of them got out of the vehicles and moved closer to one another. Brianna wanted to scream, wanted to tell them to run, but something in her gut warned her that would be a big mistake. Jenny's lips were quivering with fear, and Frog didn't look like a prince at all. For the first time in his life, Frog truly felt fear rush up his spine. The calmness that Andy displayed just moments before was replaced with a feeling of despair. They all felt like Brianna, felt as if they should run, but couldn't. Not that anyone or anything was stopping them, but it just felt like a very bad idea. There was another screech, and the four of them turned toward the pond. The apparition was floating above the water just at the shoreline. Her dark hair was flowing behind her, and she wasn't falling this time. Her mouth was contorted as if she were about to release another screech, but this time, she didn't. The spirit of Elena looked directly at Frog with a face of recognition. The spirit began shaking above the water. "What the fuck, Frog?" Andy whispered. I don't know, man," Frog whispered back. She's pointing at you," Jenny said on the verge of sobbing. "No, she's not. She's pointing at us. She don't want us to be here, and I think we should give her what she wants," Frog whispered back. Andy, Jenny, and Brianna slowly stepped away from Frog. Elena's spirit kept pointing to the Valley Prince. It was recognition, and it wasn't coincidence. "What the hell, man? What did I ever do to her?" "I don't know, man, but I wouldn't make any sudden movements if I were you." Summer, 1981. He had seen Elena come in his store through the years. He longed for her, but she was taken. Dustin Hines was her man, and it didn't sit well with him. Not one bit. He heard it through the grapevine that they were going to Langley Pond for a romantic getaway this weekend, and today was Friday. Elena wouldn't give him the time of day, would barely utter a word when she came in to pick out a movie. Sometimes Dustin would be with her. She would come in with her beautiful long black hair and perfect smile, teasing him. Elena had to know that he was in love with her, but she would come in with Dustin flaunting her love for him and, in a sense, a disdain for Frog Spradley. He didn't understand why. Valley Video was going to be his outright in another year. He would be a reputable business owner. Frog was sure that the video rental business would be a necessity for generations to come. But she would come and go, tease him, taunt him, show him what he can't have, show him who was getting her love. This wasn't going to work for Frog. He would be at that pond tonight, just like the song said. Bang, bang, he shot me down. Bang, bang, I hit the ground. Bang, bang, that awful sound. Bang, bang, my baby shot me down. And that's exactly what Frog would do. He would go to the pond. He would hear them making love in the tent. He would take his machete and get Dustin to come outside while Elena was sleeping. He'd hack him up and chop off his head. He'd take the John boat out late. He heard them talking about their late-night fishing trip. She would come out. She would see the light. She would think that her lover was fishing without her. She'd see the man that she scorned. See what she could have had. He would toss the head of her betrothed. She would see him. All she had to do was keep swimming to the boat, and she would have lived. But she turned and swam away, afraid of the man that was truly meant for her. He'd line her up with his deer rifle. Frog was a dead shot. He wasn't going to miss. He'd let her feel as if she may get away before the shot would zip through the back of her skull. It was pure luck that they pinned it on Billie Jean. He always had a short fuse, and that was all very well and good with Frog. He'd find another love, one that would love him. They'd have a baby boy, and he would keep the name of Frog alive. Frog was the spitting image of his father and his grandfather. He'd grow up as a valley prince. Frog Sr. wouldn't think of Elena again until he took his final breath in 2015, when the song floated through his mind for the first time since that day. Bang, bang, he shot me down. Bang, bang, I hit the ground. Bang, bang, that awful sound. Bang, bang, my baby shot me down. Frog died with his loved ones around him and tears in his eyes. His family didn't know. The tears weren't for them, but for Elena, the spirit of Langley Pond. Summer 2021. The specter was transfixed on Frog, and he was in turn locked onto her lifeless eyes. Her mouth curled in pain, and it was as if she were the one seeing a ghost. Frog couldn't move. It was as if he were stuck knees deep in mud, and the air around him was infused with a coldness that chilled him to his soul. The spirit of Langley Pond seemed to know him, and she didn't seem all that thrilled that he was looking at her. "Oh my God!" Brianna screamed in Frog's direction. "She knows you!" Andy turned away from the ghost and saw the angst in Frog's face before he said, "That's impossible. There's no way she knows Frog." The ghost floated closer to them and seemed to put her feet on the ground. The entire shoreline got much colder, and the others felt it. Everyone was stuck in their spot, afraid to make any sudden movement. The four of them formed somewhat of a straight line, and they all faced the spirit of Elena, but that spirit was only focused on one of them. And she changed. The life came back into her eyes. They turned from black pools to light brown. The distortion in her face also melted away. The ghostly apparition that the four of them witnessed floating above the pond changed into healed flesh and blood. She no longer floated but walked toward Frog. He managed to utter the first words to break the silence. Hey, look, what do you want from us?" The young woman smiled at him and held out her hands. Frog wanted to believe this was just a dream, that he had drank 5 too many PBRs and would wake up any minute, but he knew that he was in the here and now. "Take my hand. You were there. You killed my boyfriend. You chopped off his head. And you shot me," Elena said and continued. "Take my hand so I can leave this God-forsaken place." Frog trembled. His brain was trying to fight the overwhelming compulsion to grab Elena's hand. If he did, he thought it might be the last thing that he ever did. Brianna found her courage and spoke. "Elena!" The girl turned to face her. "He couldn't have killed your boyfriend or you. Please, just listen to me." Elena placed her hands at her side and gave Brianna a sense of relief. She was going to listen to her. Good. Look, the year is 2021. You were killed in 1981 by Billie Jean Morris. It was in all the papers. My mama told me about it. The whole town knew it was Billie Jean. He was shot dead, Elena. They got the man that killed you and your boyfriend. Elena turned her attention away from Frog for just a moment and walked to Brianna. Jenny ran to Andy and stuck her head in the crook of his arm like she was trying to shield herself from seeing a kill in a horror movie. Elena walked toward Brianna. She seemed to admire the beauty of the girl. They were close to the same age. Billie Jean Morris did not kill me. Billie Jean Morris never talked to me. I know who I saw, and it was his face, she said, and pointed back at Frog. Shit, woman, I wasn't even born yet! Please! Frog pleaded. It was him, Elena said, and started to turn away from Brianna. Brianna lunged forward and grabbed Elena around her wrist. She was surprised that she didn't pass through her. Brianna really had a grip on the young woman. Elena spun around in Brianna's backwards hug like a slippery eel and placed her hands on Brianna's head. The memory of that night and her death filled Brianna's mind in what felt like a wave of electricity. Brianna blinked rapidly. Andy pushed Jenny away and started to run toward his girlfriend. No! Brianna screamed. Stop! Andy stopped in his tracks. Elena looked into Brianna's eyes, looking for understanding. You see, it was him. You see that now, right? Elena broke Brianna's grip around her waist and turned back to Frog. What the hell, man? I wasn't even on the planet then! It was his daddy, Brianna shouted. This made Elena pause. It is 2021. His daddy's name was Frog, and his name is Frog. He looks just like his daddy. He didn't have anything to do with it. Andy rushed to his girlfriend's side, and Jenny was right behind him. The three of them stood together. Frog was still frozen in place. Elena moved closer to Frog. She could see the man that chopped off Dustin's head. She could almost feel the bullet break open the back of her skull all over again. He put his hands out in front of him, hoping this would keep her at arm's length. She touched his hand, and it was colder than anything he had ever felt in his young life. You have his blood, and a penance has to be paid, Elena said as she grabbed the Valley Prince by the hand. I will not stay here any longer. I was waiting on him to return, and he never did. But his son will do. You carry the blood of the man that killed me. You should have never been born, Elena said, and pulled Frog closer to her. Brianna and Andy started to run toward them. Jenny was a blubbering mess. To save their friend, but it was too late. Elena had a firm grip on both of Frog's arms, and she morphed back into the specter. Frog was lifted straight up into the sky, his legs kicking and his lungs screaming into the night. Brianna and Andy shouted Frog's name as he disappeared into the sky. His screams went silent. Andy and Brianna looked at one another, waiting for another sound, another sign of life from the Valley Prince. What they heard in the far distance of the pond was a splash, a cackle, and then silence. The spirit of Elena Ann Sanders was now free. It was replaced by the son of the man that killed her and Dustin. This would be the penance that set her free. Brianna, Andy, and Jenny would never be able to explain what they witnessed. They just said Frog went giggin' and never came back. What else could they say? Bed Breakfast and Zombies by Keith Tomlin. Jake sighed loudly as he stared out the second-story window of the bed and breakfast that he and his father had been staying at for the last few days. This sucks, he thought. I should have gone to Grandpa's with Mom. His family was on a rare vacation, taking a trip from Chicago to New York City to visit his mom's parents. It was the four of them, Jake, his little sister Sarah, his father Edward, and his mother Karen, all jammed into a 12-year-old Volvo wagon. Jake remembered when his father, during breakfast a few days ago, could barely contain his excitement. "Kids, I was looking over my papers last night," he said, pointing to a huge stack of papers that he pored over every moment that he wasn't driving. "And I found something exciting." He looked wide-eyed at both of his children. Sarah was using all of her concentration to draw on a coloring page that doubled as the kids' menu, so Edward focused on his 11-year-old son. "Jake, how would you like to look for some witches?" Jake was swept away with his dad's excitement. They dropped the others off at his grandfather's house and jumped back on the road to a small town in New York called Stones Creek. Jake wondered what they needed to hunt witches. Do we need garlic or maybe silver bullets? What Jake didn't know and soon found out was the only things they needed was the local library and long walks in an old graveyard across the street from the Grinning Cat Inn, the bed and breakfast at which they would be staying. Jake was bored. He sighed, louder this time. "I heard you the first time," his dad said, without looking up from the papers he copied from the library. When he finished the page, he finally looked at Jake, removing his unlit pipe from his mouth, and pointed at Jake with it. "Why don't you go outside and play?" he said, gesturing to the door with his pipe. "But Dad, I'm bored," Jake said, his shoulders slumping forward. "Look, once I get through these pages, we can take a walk. You can either go outside and play until then, or sit there quietly and read a book." His dad gave him one last stern look before turning his attention back to his stack of papers. Read a book, Jake thought. Why is it always books with him? Jake didn't want books. He wanted fun and adventure. Suppressing another sigh, he turned his attention back to the window. He was surprised to see a car on the road. He had only seen one other car all day. He was even more surprised and excited to see that the car started to slow down. "Dad, Dad, Dad," Jake said quickly, as he had always done when he grew excited. "There's a car turning into the parking lot." "Really? That's interesting," his dad mumbled. Jake watched intently as the car glided to a stop in front of the inn. The driver, a huge, bulky man, got out and opened the rear door. A well-dressed man stepped out of the back seat of the car, quickly followed by a young boy who looked around Jake's age. "Dad, Dad, Dad, Dad," Jake said, getting louder with each word. "They have a kid. Can I go down and meet him? Come on, Dad, can I?" Jack started jumping back and forth from one foot to the other. "Okay, hang on," his dad said, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "All right, I guess I'm done here for now. I don't want you scaring the poor child with your enthusiasm." Edward set the stack of papers aside. "Let's go downstairs and greet the new arrivals." The door to the Grinning Cat Inn flew open, and the large man entered. He scanned the room before stepping aside, allowing the well-dressed man to enter. The reception room was lined with cedar panels and had a counter that ran along one wall. A large staircase leading up was right across from the front door. Two other doorways led to a dining room and a large den with a roaring fire in the fireplace. Upon hearing the door, the owner of the inn, Mr. Jarvison, a tall, thin, elderly man, moved to the counter. "Good evening. How may I help you?" asked Mr. Jarvison. The well-dressed man walked over to the counter and, with a thick Slavic accent, said, "I am Count Dmitri Romanova. I have reservation for 2 rooms." Yes, of course. Your rooms are ready, Mr. How should I address you?" Mr. Jarvison asked. "Please, you may call me Count Romanova," said the Count. "The title is largely symbolic at this point, but," he shrugged, "we do have our protocols." "Yes, sir. I will show you to your rooms," Mr. Jarvison said, half bowing. Count Romanova waved him off. Ivan, my manservant, will look to the rooms and luggage. I wish to relax by the fire, he said, pointing towards the den. He then looked at Ivan, who nodded and gestured to Mr. Jarvison to lead the way up the stairs. The Count turned towards the door and called out, "Come, Nikolai! Let's rest before dinner." A small-framed child around 10 years old entered the inn. He silently followed his father into the den. Edward and Jake had to press themselves against the wall to allow Ivan to pass them on the stairway. Jake stared at the large man, shocked at the sheer size of him. Ivan stopped and turned, glaring at Jake, who quickly turned and ran to catch up with his father. 20 minutes later, Jake was standing outside with Nikolai, trying to find a way to end the awkward silence that hung over them. It took his dad a few minutes to convince the Count to allow his son outside to play, and now Jake was wishing that his father had failed. "So, Jake said, do you like to play ball?" "Sorry, I do not know this game. Ball," Nikolai replied in broken English. "No, ball is not a game. Well, it's part of a game." Jake thought that over for a few seconds. "Never mind. Do you want to play hide and seek?" Jake said, hopefully. "Hide and seek. What do we hide?" Nikolai asked. "No," Jake said, frustrated. "You go hide and I try to find you." Nikolai asked, "We are to be friends, correct?" Jake nodded. "Then why would I hide from you?" Nikolai asked. "Friends should trust each other and not need to hide." "Huh, I never thought of it that way," Jake said. "Okay, well, we could..." Jake was stumped. He racked his brain for something to do, and his face lit up when he finally thought of something that no kid could possibly resist. "Do you want to see something scary?" Jake teased, with a big grin. The young foreign boy nodded, slowly. Edward leaned forward over the overstuffed chair, tapping his pipe on the stone of the fireplace and sweeping the ashes into the fire. "What brings you to this little corner of nowhere, Count?" Edward asked, leaning back and refilling his pipe. He looked apologetically at Mr. Jarvison. "Sorry, no offense." "None taken. This is a small town." "Very small," Mr. Jarvison agreed. The Count took another puff on his cigar and slowly let the smoke escape his mouth. "I came to America on a diplomatic trip, but I wanted to take some time to visit the relatives." Mr. Jarvison sat up, beaming. "You have relations living here?" Count Romanov slowly shook his head. "Living? No. Sorry, I used the wrong word. I have..." He waved his hand in the air, causing ash to fall onto the arm of his chair. "Ancestors here, in cemetery." He pointed toward the graveyard. Jake led Nikolai across the street and into the old graveyard. They walked through the old gravestones, many of which were so weathered that you couldn't read the words engraved upon them. Jake spent many hours here the last few days walking the overgrown paths between the graves with his father. This place held little interest for Jake except for an ancient crypt that they were now approaching. It was a small stone building with vines growing up the walls toward the tiled roof. The most striking feature of this building was that along each wall there were a pair of statues that looked like they were emerging out of the stone surface. Each statue was of a creature with a bald head, pointy ears, and a mouth with razor-sharp teeth. His dad said they were ghouls, undead creatures that feast on the flesh of the living. "What do you think?" Jake asked as they approached the crypt. He snuck a sideways glance, hoping to have scared the other boy, but instead, he looked amazed. The smaller boy slowly walked around the building, admiring each statue in turn. He then walked along each wall, running his hand along the stone surface as he went. Nikolai turned to Jake and asked, "Where is the door?" "Yeah, my dad wondered the same thing. Weird, huh?" Jake replied. Nikolai continued to walk around the building, examining each wall as he went. He finally stopped and waved at Jake, pointing at a brick in the wall. Jake walked over and bent close to discover that there were drawings etched into this brick. Drawings his dad would have called runes. The more he looked, the more they seemed to shimmer. He began tracing them with his finger, and he swore he felt them start to grow hot. Jake took a step back to ask Nikolai if he had spotted any other bricks like this when his head started to buzz. The buzzing turned into a voice, deep inside his head. The voice began whispering 6 words over and over again. 6 words that he did not understand. These words got louder and louder until finally they burst from his lips in a booming voice. Costos secreta, predo malum, apier ostium. Jake was unable to stop himself from chanting. Costos secreta, predo malum, apiere ostium. Jake heard a low hum coming from the wall in front of him. Costos secreta, predo malum, apiere ostium. The runes started to glow brightly. Costos secreta, predo malum, apiere ostium. Jake's voice roared, and the wall opened. The Count tossed the remains of his cigar into the fireplace and looked over at Edward. What brings you here? Edward leaned forward excitedly, as if he had been waiting to answer that question all evening. Well, in my day job, I'm a history professor at the University of Chicago, but my real passion is writing about the occult, magic, and the supernatural. He took a puff off of his pipe and continued. I was researching the Salem witch trials, trying to see if I could bring anything new to the table, when I uncovered a series of correspondence between 2 sisters, both witches. One, sadly, was convicted of witchcraft and perished in Salem. He shook his head. The other one wrote about her coven moving here to help protect witches against persecution. Most intriguing, said the Count. Did they say how they would protect the witches? I haven't found many details on that, Edward said, sounding annoyed, except that it involved the undead. Mr. Jarvison looked around uneasily. The secret door in the crypt's wall swung open, revealing an empty room except for a steep staircase leading down. The air smelled stale and musty, and there was an eerie silence. Jake looked at Nikolai, who stared back, wide-eyed. Both boys started forward, Jake in the lead. The staircase ended in a stone door. Jake pushed against it until the door finally screeched open. The sound reverberated throughout the entire structure, sending chills down Jake's spine. The room it revealed was dark, the light from outside barely penetrating several feet. Jake hesitantly stepped forward, and flames shot around the room as a dozen torches flared to life. They revealed a large, circular room with a dozen stone doors around the perimeter. The floor was made of white marble with black marble inlays, creating a large pentagram. In the center of the pentagram stood an altar with a large leather-bound book sitting atop it. Wow, Jake exclaimed as he took in the sight. He looked back to check on Nikolai, who was a few steps behind him. Jake slowly moved forward, fascinated by the book. Almost without realizing it, he was standing in front of the altar, staring down at the large tome. He looked back, and Nikolai was standing at the edge of the pentagram, with one foot raised, as if he was trying to decide if he wanted to cross over it or not. Jake turned back and reached out to touch the book. The room exploded in white light, and Jake was blinded as he heard Nikolai cry out in pain. A series of loud thumps shook the ground as the stone doors fell open. He looked up and saw black shapes moving behind each doorway. Jake turned and started to run toward the stairs. Nikolai was on the ground at the edge of the pentagram, withering in pain. As Jake paused to help Nikolai, he glanced around the room. In each of the dozen doorways, a walking corpse emerged, each dressed in filthy, flowing white robes. Their skin was leathery and taut across their faces and hands. As they emerged from the darkness, they raised their hands as if they were searching for something, sniffing almost like dogs. Jake could hear the wet rattles of them inhaling deeply. The creatures didn't look like the ones from the movies, but he knew what they were. Zombies. Jake stood there, paralyzed with fear, until the nearest zombie suddenly caught the scent of something in the air and whipped its head around to stare at the 2 boys. A rune carved into each of their foreheads began to glow as they opened their mouths and moaned. Jake pulled Nikolai up and pushed him towards the stairs. Without taking another look behind him, he ran. "Are there any of these, witches still around?" the Count asked. That's what I've been trying to find out. I believe that most of the original settlers were witches. I've been looking at the genealogy records and, as far as I can tell, the last of their living relatives perished in a fire back in the late 1950s, Edward said somberly. Yes, that was an awful thing, Mr. Jarvison mused. My family lived a few counties over when it happened. I was just a young child, but I still remember the news accounts. Very sad. Most of the town was attending some kind of meeting at the town hall when it caught on fire. Very few survived. All three men fell silent. The two children burst from the crypt, sounds of heavy footsteps echoing from the darkness behind them. Jake paused a moment to try to get his bearings. The sun was going down, and he was a bit confused on how to get back to the inn. Nikolai had kept running straight into the overgrown brush that had overtaken this part of the cemetery. Upon hearing footsteps at the top of the stairs behind him, Jake quickly followed. Why did he have to run this way? Jake wondered as a sticker bush tugged at his clothes. He finally gave a great pull and fell back into a clearing. Getting up, he saw that he was at the stone path that followed the 10-foot-tall stone wall that surrounded the cemetery. Jake recognized some of the tall monuments, and he knew where he was. Jake turned toward the right and ran along the path. After a few minutes of running, Jake heard a scream coming from ahead of him. They must have got Nikolai, Jake thought. He began to run faster. The Count broke the silence suddenly. Did you hear a noise? Something is not right. The other two men shook their heads, looking around the room. Ivan, the Count said quietly. The large man stepped forward out of the shadows, quiet as a mouse. Go check on Nikolai. Ivan nodded and glided off. Something is not right, Count Romanova repeated himself, looking out the window into the growing darkness. Jake ran faster than he'd ever ran in his life. As the path turned toward the entrance, he tripped on a tree root and was sent flying. He hit the ground hard and rolled a few times before landing against a small tree. However, when he looked up, he realized that it wasn't a tree. It was the legs of a large zombie. The undead creature looked down at him and, surprisingly, turned away and shambled on. Jake was stunned, but flew back into action when he heard Nikolai cry out again, this time very close. Jake looked around and saw Nikolai standing at the entrance of the cemetery, in the middle of a ring of 5 zombies. One had grabbed him by the arm and was lifting him up while the others reached out for him, the runes glowing brightly on their forehead. Jake picked up a rotting tree branch for a weapon and started to move to help Nikolai. He stopped when he saw a huge shape come out of the darkness. He sighed with relief when he realized it was Ivan, but the look of murderous rage on the big man's face almost scared him as much as the zombies did. Ivan waded into the middle of the group of zombies with a ferocity that Jake had never seen before. Ivan tossed the zombies aside like they were rag dolls, striking them with thunderous blows that didn't seem to do any real damage to them. When a creature was knocked down, they would rise back up and continue their assault. When 3 more zombies stumbled into view, Ivan pushed the 2 nearest ones down, picked up Nikolai, and ran back toward the inn. Seeing Ivan disappear into the blackness jolted Jake into action, and he ran after them. The door to the inn crashed open and Ivan charged inside, still carrying Nikolai. Ivan's suit was torn and his face and arms were covered with scratches. Jake ran in after them and slammed the door shut, locking it. Dad! Zombies! Jake yelled. What? Edward said, leaping to his feet. Right then, the window behind Edward exploded inward. Undead hands clawed at the windowsill, trying to pull themselves into the room. Another window was smashed and loud thumping shook the front door as the dead tried to break it down. Oh my, what is going on? Yelled a terrified Mr. Jarvison. Ivan ran to hold the front door as Edward grabbed a lamp and started hitting at the arms reaching into the den. They could hear glass breaking in the other rooms of the house. Mr. Jarvison finally snapped and ran out of the den. He let out a terrified scream as a zombie lurched out of the dining room in the reception area. It ignored Mr. Jarvison as it shambled toward the Count, the rune on its forehead glowing brighter with each step. The runes! Edward yelled, pointing at the glowing brand on the zombie's forehead. Some powerful magic created these things. Can you stop them? Jake said, fearing the answer. Not without knowing the spell used to animate them, Edward yelled back, using the lamp he had to push a zombie off the windowsill. Jake, the book! Nikolai yelled, trying to help his father, who was struggling with the zombie from the dining room. "Yeah, Dad, there's some kind of spell book or something in that weird crypt in the graveyard," Jake said to his father. "That may be our only chance," Edward shot back. "Count, we need to get to that crypt, now," he yelled. The Count, who was holding his own against the zombie, yelled out, "Ivan, to me! We need to get to the graveyard!" Ivan rushed over and tossed the zombie attacking the Count aside through a broken window. Just as Ivan turned back to the front door, it burst open and 3 more zombies began to stumble in. Ivan ran and leapt, knocking them back outside. "Go! Go!" yelled Edward as everyone ran toward the front door. The next 10 minutes seemed like a nightmare to Jake. Ivan was an unstoppable tank running through the dark, knocking over any creature in his way. The rest of the group followed in his wake, trying to keep up. Once in the graveyard, Edward pointed the way to the crypt. The small party entered the crypt and ran down the stairs to the large marble room. Edward ran over to the book on the altar. Ivan stood with his back pressed up against the door, waiting for any sign of the undead creatures. The Count and his son stood just off to the side of Ivan, backs to the wall. Something felt off to Jake, but he didn't know what it was. He watched his dad quickly flip through the book, struggling to understand the words on the pages. Jake tried to connect the pieces. There was something he couldn't put together. "Wait, I think I got it," Edward said, almost to himself. He began reading the words from the book in a loud, booming voice. The undead began pounding on the door, and Ivan, muscles bulging, struggled to keep the door shut. The ground began to shake, and a wind started to rip through the chamber. Howls of anger and pain roared from behind the door as the undead intensified their attack. Something finally clicked in Jake's mind. The zombies ignored me and Mr. Jarvison. The runes grew brighter when they got closer to the Count and his son. "Dad, stop! The zombies aren't after us! They're after them!" Jake yelled, pointing at the Count, who looked back at Jake with a wide grin. Edward showed no sign of hearing his son. He kept chanting, and as he chanted, his voice grew even louder, and the tremors became more powerful. When Edward reached the end of the spell, the black marble of the pentagram burst into flames. The pounding on the door ceased as a silence descended over the room. Edward leaned against the altar, exhausted. Ivan opened the door, and only empty robes littered the floor. No sign of the zombies. Jake started to run to his father when the ground began to vibrate. The white marble floor started to crack as clawed hands began digging their way out of the ground. "What?" Jake exclaimed. "More zombies?" "Oh no," the Count remarked. "These are the relatives I spoke of earlier. My ancestors." The Count laughed as he began to change. His face elongated while his teeth grew sharp. His hair disappeared while his ears grew larger and more pointed. He became one of the creatures from the statues on the outside of the crypt. He became a ghoul. Ivan and Nikolai also began to revert to their true selves. "Those meddling witches kept my family imprisoned for hundreds of years. When we discovered them, we took our revenge and burned them all. But we needed someone pure of heart to open the crypt. Someone like your son," said the Count, running his tongue over his razor-sharp teeth. "We also needed another fool to undo the spell of protection and destroy those pesky undead guardians of theirs," he said, gesturing back towards the white robes. "It took a bit of planning, but we were finally able to forge those letters to draw you here." Dozens of ghouls were slowly extracting themselves from the ground, their shining eyes looking hungrily at Jake and Edward. "I do hope you will join us for dinner," the Count bellowed, laughing. The Wolf of Fagan County by David O'Hanlon. Maybe Whistler was a nice town once. It seemed that way until the summer of '86. The old folks always whispered about certain places, about the places you don't go and the boogeymen that dwelled within. Everyone in Fagan County knew a local ghost story. Back then, I loved to hear those stories. Nowadays, not so much. My dad trucked crops from the farms into the neighboring states of Louisiana and Mississippi. I didn't see much of him. He left before dawn and got home after sunset. The day before my 13th birthday, he took a load to Shreveport. I awoke to a stack of used horror comics the next morning with a note that read, "You're old enough for the good ones now, soldier." I loved the way those pages smelled. After all these years, I still have a couple of them in the suitcases I live out of. I'd read through the entire bundle in a week. I flipped through them and found the one I'd enjoy the most for a second visit when my mother called from downstairs. "Connie, come quick!" she shouted. I hated when she called me that. It was bad enough being named Conrad. The effeminate nickname caught on with my friends in second grade, and then with the rest of the student body by the end of recess. Something sounded off in her voice as I trudged down the narrow staircase that descended into the kitchen. Mom was sitting at the table with her elbows pressing into the vinyl top, and her hands hiding her face. My sister, Lisa, had her head down, shrouded in her arms. Her body convulsed as she bawled noisily inside. I held my breath all the way to the table. No one spoke to me as I slid the chair away from the edge and eased my way into it. Mom reached over and put her hand on mine. "Something terrible's happened," she whispered. Something terrible had happened a few weeks ago, too, and a few weeks before that. We'd discussed both of those events as a family. No one was crying then. Sure, Mom had been shaken up by the discovery of the first body, but it seemed like nothing to worry about. We all knew Old Man McGarrah from around town. He would pop out like a magician's rabbit to grump about what a bunch of slack-jawed hippie spawn all the kids were whenever you least expected it. The police said it was a heart attack that took him, and that coyotes took to eating his remains. Grotesque and unseemly as it were, my folks delivered the news to my sister and me with just the facts and reminded us to stay away from the woods. Coyotes rarely attacked people, but Dad said there's something different about any animal, including man, once they got a taste for blood. The second time we were called to the table, it was clearly more bothersome. Mom wasn't handling it well, but she remained calm as she told us about the bodies found along Country Road 63. A couple of teens gone to make out got cut up real bad. Chief Hardesty said it was just a freak occurrence, a crime of opportunity, and that the killer was likely long gone. Our parents told us to be home 30 minutes before sundown after that, and to never go anywhere alone, just in case. This time was different. "Connie," she started, tugging at the silver locket dangling from her thin neck. Her voice trembled. "It's Brenda." My stomach nodded. Brenda Knowles had been Lisa's best friend since kindergarten. She'd babysat for me on a few occasions and came to eat dinner with us every Wednesday. She was my first crush, too. I sniffled, but held back any other reaction until Mom could finish. Maybe it wasn't what I thought. Maybe those old Tales from the Crypt comics were poisoning my imagination the way Father Dean said they would at youth service. Maybe she was just moving away. That would explain why they were so upset. "Chief Hardesty found her this morning," Mom continued. "Nope, it was exactly what I thought it was." I don't remember the exact moment that I realized the killings were exactly 1 month apart, but I do remember Lisa raising her face to stare at Mom and then me in turn. Her lips quivered, and then she stood up fast enough to knock the chair to the floor. She slammed her fists onto the table and screamed. That I'll never forget. That look. And those words. She was eaten. Lisa cried until she passed out that night. I watched the news with Mom to see if the police had anything to say. The station's newest reporter, Rex Willits, looked like he'd been sick as he raised the microphone close to his chin. His hand shook slightly and his trademark smile was nothing but a thin line of white teeth below his bushy mustache. Rex nodded slowly and started his report when the phone rang in the kitchen, and Mom went to answer. I'm here at the Ridley Funeral Home in Fagan County to report on a grisly, unimaginable crime," Rex started. He swallowed hard. "The body of 15-year-old Brenda Knowles was found just before dawn this morning. Brenda had been babysitting for family friends the prior evening. She started the short walk to her home just before 11 p.m. I turned my attention to Mom's shouting in the kitchen. "What do you mean 2 days, Paul?" she growled. "It doesn't take 2 damn days to get a mechanic." Dad's truck broke down. That happened a lot when he was hauling rice to Shreveport. Only then, though. Mom noticed too. She had a pretty good idea of what was going on. "What about the kids?" she wailed. "You know what's going on here. You're leaving us alone so you—" Her voice became muffled and I scooted closer to the television to hear what Rex had to say. I heard the phone slam against the receiver several times and Mom stomping up the steps. "I've seen the body. My God in heaven, I'll never unsee it now," Rex said when movement caught his attention. He snapped his fingers and pointed his cameraman in the direction of the police chief. Other reporters rushed in around him. Rex elbowed one of them out of his way and reached in with his mic. "Don't you buzzards have anything better to do?" Chief Hardesty barked. "A child's dead, for Christ's sake." "How?" Rex asked. "How did she die?" "Violently," Hardesty answered in his low, gruff drawl. "Is this related to last month's double homicide?" a woman asked. "We don't have conclusive evidence linking the two this early in the investigation," Hardesty said. His shoulders sagged. "There are similarities." "Were the other victims missing flesh and muscle?" Rex quizzed him. "Were there bite marks on them as well?" Hardesty glared at Rex, and then spoke with forced restraint. "At this time, I'm asking all residents of Whistler and the outlying areas to stay indoors at night. The curfew is merely a request, however." The wail of sirens cut the report short. We wouldn't find out until the morning that they'd found another body. Crazy Dolores lived in a shack on the edge of town. She sold herbal remedies and told fortunes for $1. No one knew how long she'd been dead. I climbed into bed, but didn't dare go to sleep. I opened a comic and thought about Dad. Maybe the rig really broke down, but I didn't buy it. He was spending time with some woman, in a strange way that made me feel better. He was more worried about getting laid than he was about the killer on the loose, so maybe it wasn't a big deal. My door creaked open, and Lisa slipped through the gap. I laid the comic down. I didn't know what to say. Sorry your friend was brutally murdered and partially eaten really didn't seem like it helped the situation. Then again, we're going to find Brenda's killers wasn't a winner either, but that's exactly what Lisa said as she leaned on my dresser. I gawked at her and waited for what felt like an eternity for her to say something else. "Look, Connie," she started, then paused and chewed her bottom lip. "Chief Hardesty is a scumbag. He's going to pin all this on the first person that ain't Baptist enough for him. Then the murderer is just going to drift away." I was still too young to know how common that sort of thing was around there, or what kind of man Baxter Hardesty really was. I did want to make sure that Brenda's killer got caught, however. "The killings are about a month apart," I said, hesitantly, unsure of exactly what I'd discovered. I shrugged. "What if the killer travels and just stops through here every few weeks? Or lives here and returns home once a month?" Lisa offered. "Dad's friend Ted is a long-haul driver." I remembered. Ted tried to convince Dad to work with him all the time. I also remembered Ted coming to my birthday party. I shook my head. "I'm pretty sure he's out of town right now." I scratched the 2 recently sprouted hairs on my chin. "What about a delivery driver? Brown's only gets a few deliveries a month." Lisa thought it over and nodded. "Okay, we'll go by and see when they got a delivery." Thinking the conversation was done, I lifted my comic. "What is that, Connie?" Lisa asked shakily. "What are you reading?" I closed the issue and looked down at the cover. Bright yellow eyes stared up at me above the fangs dripping blood over a broken skull. I looked up at my sister. I knew what she was thinking, and I wanted to tell her that she was stupid. I wanted to. But I didn't. the same thought hit me when I looked at those fierce yellow orbs on the black cover. My stomach pitched as I thought about the recent events. My eyes left the stare of the beast and met my sister's. "It's a werewolf," I finally said. We tried to put the notion back into our imaginations where werewolves were supposed to stay. Lisa and I rode our bikes to Brown's General Store just past noon. The curfew officially started at sundown and was no longer a request. Not that it mattered, the streets were already deserted. The baseball cards sputtering in the bike spokes signaled the arrival of Brad Breaker. Brad was between Lisa and myself in age, so he hung out with both of us. He was the definition of cool with his acid-wash jeans and his torn midriff Bruce Springsteen t-shirt. Brad could play guitar. And football. He was also muscular, with aquiline features and sandy blonde hair that made him look like Patrick Swayze in Red Dawn, and made Lisa's brain stop working. My mom spazzed when I said I was leaving. Brad looked at the grocery store and turned back to us. "But you said it was an emergency." "You won't get in trouble, will you?" "Nah," Brad shrugged. "My old man said experience builds character, and that I needed to bring back more Folgers." "Lucky this is our first stop," I said. "So why are we here?" Lisa looked to me. Telling him our theory would have been the right thing to do, but she thought he was cute and hoped I, being closer to the childish age to believe such things, would do it for her. I did not. "We want to find Brenda's killer," I said and waved at the street. "Everyone's scared to death, but we want to help." "Why?" Brad asked. "I mean, why do you think you can do it faster than the police?" I removed the wrinkled, somewhat neatly folded newspaper clippings and handed them to him. "Mr. McGarrah died and his corpse was eaten by coyotes. That's what they say anyhow. There's been a killing at the same time every month since. Each of those victims was partially eaten as well," I said, rattling off the facts as quickly as I could. "I think the killer comes to town once a month. We think the murderer might be a delivery person or a truck driver, so we want to ask the Browns if they've gotten any shipments this week," Lisa added. "Gnarly," Brad nodded slowly. "Let's get to work." The Browns deliveries turned up bupkis. We checked with every business in town for the same results. That theory was as dead as Brenda, which left us with only one other possibility. 7:15, we stopped by the ice cream shop and got sundaes for a quick sugar rush before dinner. I debated sharing the werewolf idea. I'd been trying to dismantle it as we asked around. If it was a werewolf, why'd the killings start only recently? Was anyone acting differently around town? Was anyone new? What made someone a werewolf? So many questions, but none of them ruled out the possibility. What if... "It's stupid," Brad said, staring up at the now full moon. "What if it's a werewolf?" Lisa choked and stared at me, wide-eyed over puffed cheeks full of banana split. "I mean, my pops tells me to stay away from Snyder Creek because some kids died back in the 20s. Everyone says that was a monster. Why couldn't this be one?" "Darn it!" I snapped my fingers and scooted my chair back with a screech of steel feet against the sidewalk. "Why didn't I think of that?" "Think of what?" Lisa asked. "I've heard that story too," I answered. "The Snyder Creek ghoul. They never found out what really happened. Lisa, we need to go to the library and see if we can find any old papers about it." "Not a chance, Connie." She pointed at the Sherbert skyline. "We need to get home before dark. It's a long ride." "The library's probably already closed anyway," Brad offered. "The cops are never going to believe us," Lisa said. "After tonight, he'll just be a man," I reassured her. "We'll have a month to find out who the werewolf is and prove it." "Crap!" Brad let his head hang. Most non-triumphant. "What?" Lisa and I asked in unison. "I forgot the coffee." He put a foot on a pedal. "I'm going to hustle to Brown's. See you later." He wouldn't. Brad's body wasn't found for 6 days. Worst of all, strange as it sounds to say it like a bad thing, he didn't get eaten. It would be a while before Lisa drew a startling conclusion from the fact. The curfew started an hour earlier after that. A citizens' patrol was organized as well. It wasn't much more than a dozen yokels with spotlights and guns driving the paved roads, however. They wouldn't go down the miles of gravel paths where there weren't any streetlights to keep them safe. They didn't find the werewolf either. All they accomplished was shooting a drifter who was busking at the Crispy Chicken truck stop. Chief Hardesty tried to pin the murders on that poor soul like Lisa had suspected he would. No one was buying it. By that point, Dad had decided that between the new woman and a monster running roughshod back home, he had all the reason he needed to move to Louisiana. He came while we were asleep to collect his things. We spent every day tracking down information and investigating whatever absurd idea came to us. It was 2 nights before the next full moon when Lisa told me her troublesome theory. He didn't eat Brad because he was warning us, she said somberly across the table. The local library had few books on lycanthropy. We'd been reading them every night and comparing them to the 2 clippings we had from 1926, when the Snyder Creek Ghoul had struck. I put the piece of paper I was using as a bookmark between the pages of the tome and closed it. "What do you mean?" I whispered. "We were asking around about delivery schedules, about people from out of town." She shook her head. "The wolf isn't a stranger. We know him. And he heard us talking. He wants us to leave him alone." I checked my watch and reached under the table, wrestling with the zipper from my fanny pack. "Then he shouldn't have killed our friends," I growled. I pulled my prize and set it where Lisa could see with a heavy thump. Her eyes widened at the sight of cold blue steel. "Dad forgot it when he packed," I told her, and lifted the St. Christopher medallion our aunt had given me for my birthday. "I've got this and $6 silver. We can make 2 or 3 bullets with that." "We don't know how to make bullets." "Otto Dickens does," I pointed out. "We have time to get to his store and back home if we go right now." "We're not hunting this damn thing, Connie." Lisa stood quickly and looked around at the mostly empty library. She lowered her voice. "We should stop this. If he killed Brad to scare us off, then he knows who we are. We need the bullets regardless." Her face twisted with contempt. She knew I was right and scooped her backpack before heading to the exit. We rode our bikes to the fork in the road, left to our house or right to Otto Dickens' gun shop. Lisa didn't speak as she leaned and pulled her Schwinn down the right-hand street. I smiled softly and followed. Most families in Whistler had lived no further away than the county line for generations. Otto just seemed to appear one day. Despite what you might have heard about Southern hospitality, it doesn't apply to strangers. Otto had an uncanny ability with firearms, however. Small towns of rural Arkansas might have hated strangers, but they certainly loved their guns. Otto was soon a welcomed member of the community and set up a shop on the far side of town, a couple of miles past the old cemetery. The tarnished bell over the door announced our arrival with whatever the hell a bell's version of a smoker's cough is. Otto looked up from the reloading station, his face twisted with curiosity as 2 teens entered his tiny store. A long scar parted his wild white beard on the left side of his face. He held up the cartridge he was working on between his thumb and index finger. "Best goddamn rifle round in history," he said in a voice that sent a shiver racing up my spine. 45-70. I kept a chopped-down Winchester in this caliber for clearing tunnels. Can't hear much of shit anymore as a result, but it could turn old Victor Charlie inside out in those confined spaces. You ever shot a man? Lisa and I exchanged bewildered glances. How many kids could say yes? Didn't think so. Otto deposited the finished cartridge into a cardboard box beside him. Well, what can I help you with then? Too early for hunting. Not where we're hunting, I said. Lisa elbowed me in the ribs and cleared her throat. You can make bullets, right? Reckon I can. Lisa held out her hand and I gave her the items from my fanny pack. Otto left his stool and prowled to her. He bounced the coins and pendant in his palm. His amber eyes darted from one of us to the other before he snorted. "You want silver bullets." He set the materials on his counter and shook his head. "That's a shit idea. Silver's too dense. It won't take the rifling. Unless you plan on shooting at a barn, you won't be hitting nothing from more than a few feet. Muzzle velocity with nosedive too, because the round is heavier than your powder load. You won't mushroom either. They'll go clean in and clean out. Shot shells. That's what you need if you're looking to use silver." Lisa looked at me, completely lost in the gunsmith's lesson in ballistic science. I didn't understand it either. "We don't have a shotgun," I finally said. "We have a Chief's Special 38. "A snub nose shooting silver bullets." Otto burst with boisterous laughter. "Hell, you kids might as well slather yourselves in barbecue sauce and yell, 'Here, puppy,' if you plan on fighting a werewolf with that setup." My jaw fell open, and I quickly glanced to my sister to find her in the same state. Otto put a hand on each of our shoulders. I hadn't noticed before, but 3 of his fingers were missing from the one resting on me. He hunkered slightly to look us in the eyes. "Don't look surprised. Ain't much else you could be doing with silver bullets." He went behind the counter and pulled a sawed-off shotgun from beneath the register. My eyes drifted to the black tape wrapped around the walnut stock and the rough scratches where a serial number had once been. "Reckon you can borrow this one. Going to take about an hour on the shells." "You believe us?" I asked. "Lots of things in this world we pretend not to believe in no more. Pretend weren't real in the first place." He absently rubbed the scar on his cheek with the nubs of his fingers. "We pretend until they start eating us." The sun was just an orange razor's slash by the time we got home. We dropped our bikes in the yard and ran inside. The shotgun mostly fit inside Lisa's backpack so we could sneak it past Mom. Not that it mattered. All the lights were off and she wasn't waiting for us like normal. I headed for the living room while she stashed the gun and changed clothes. "How are you, soldier?" a gruff, ragged voice asked from a darkened corner. The hairs prickled on the back of my neck at my dad's pet name for me. He stepped out of the shadows. He looked different and naked as he gracefully scaled the back of the couch and perched on the cushion. The weak glow of the mail-order torch lamps shimmered on the sweat-slick hairs growing longer from his tight flesh. His elongated nails scratched at the thick orange fabric of the sofa. "You can catch a lot from whores," he said. He spoke slowly, like each word was new to him. Long strands of drool slung from his mouth as he flexed his jaw with a series of loud, painful pops. "Your ma knew. Tried to fix it with crazy Dolores." His obsidian eyes focused on the coffee table. I saw Mom's locket sitting there next to the half-full ashtray, still wet with blood. "It's not just the bite," he grumbled, his words becoming deeper and more human. "It's like the clap. I brought it home. Made her. Mr. McGarrell was... accident." He shifted on the cushion. Things moved inside his body, bones and muscles realigning, and he whined like a dog in a sticker bush. He sprang over the table and landed inches from me. His nose twitched as he took in my scent. His lips didn't touch anymore as the fangs locked together. Stiff fur covered his once chubby cheeks. "She couldn't control," he growled. His teeth snapped in front of me.
"I can. Join. Pack. Become. Come with me, soldier."
I quivered with fear, with hurt, with anger. I never suspected my parents. I needed answers. Lisa screamed and broke me out of his hypnotic gaze. His hand clamped over my mouth. He watched the stairs, waiting for Lisa to come down. I eased my hand to the fanny pack, wiggling my fingers to stretch the zipper without the noise. "Connie?" Lisa called. Dad sniffed the air. I watched his pointed ear twitch. He whipped his head back around to me and his eyes widened as the barrel pressed against his chest. The .38 was louder than I remembered. The bullets weren't silver, but they did the trick. He fell backwards and crashed through the table. I fired the rest of them into his face while he was down. He screamed in pain behind me while I darted for the stairs. I slammed into Lisa, who was clutching the shotgun. "I think there's 2 of them!" I wasn't listening. I jerked the weapon from her hands and went to finish Dad off. Only, he wasn't there. 2 bloody bullets rolled in the debris of the coffee table. A shadow fell over me from the kitchen. I threw myself to the floor, narrowly dodging the swipe of my father's claws. I rolled onto my back, and he looked more monstrous than before. His face had contorted into a snout. The front window shattered, startling me. My finger tensed on the trigger, and the silver buckshot tore through Dad's thigh, obliterating the wood paneling beyond. I clambered up the stairs and Lisa pulled me to my feet by my collar. We ran into our parents' bedroom and slammed the door behind us. I screamed when I saw the body on the bed. It was Mom, but just barely. Her features were still deformed, her body still covered in the bristly fur of her new form, and her head hung from the gnawed throat by a few remaining strands of muscle. Everything Dad tried to tell me suddenly made sense. His new girlfriend turned him, and he turned Mom. That's how the werewolf knew we were snooping. Mom was doing the killing, while Dad joined his new pack in Louisiana. I vomited at the foot of the bed. "What's happening?" Lisa asked. Downstairs sounded like a dogfight. Snarls, yips of pain, furious barks, things breaking. I threw the door open and whipped around the corner with the shotgun raised and ready. Dad pounced onto the stairs. Blood gushed from wounds, and he bared his fangs as he crawled up the steps toward me. I pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. I remembered duck hunting with him, and then my own folly. I hadn't chambered another round. He drew closer as I racked the slide, but it was too late. His claws opened deep furrows in my thigh, and I toppled backwards. Then the other wolf came into view. It grabbed my father's legs and pulled him down the steps before mounting his back. The beast howled victoriously and glared at me with amber eyes set in white fur. The monster clamped its fully formed jaws down on the back of Dad's neck. I heard the wet snap of the spine as it shook its head from side to side. I stared at the long scar, parting its fur, at the claws digging into its prey, and the missing fingers beside them. I pressed the barrel of the shotgun to the back of my father's skull and fired. The white wolf slunk away. Brain matter and pieces of skull clung to its fur. I pumped the shotgun again. And then the beast was gone. By morning, the bodies had fully reverted to their human forms. Chief Hardesty didn't question anything. Dad was the killer, and Mom was just a victim. We let him run with that story. Before our aunt could come and pick us up, we needed to take care of one more thing. We rode our bikes to Otto Dickens' shop and found him assembling a pistol at his counter. "Reckon the police seized that gun," he said simply. "Yeah," I answered. "Sorry, I guess." I set my mother's locket on the counter and looked at the gunsmith questioningly. "Wolfsbane," he licked his lips. "It helps when you're young, when the moon is still your master." He finished the pistol he was working on and slipped it into a messenger bag. He pushed the kit over to me. "I haven't killed anyone in a long time, in case you were wondering," he told us. "What do we do now?" Lisa asked. "Different breeds of wolf the world over. My kind don't have a pack here." He pointed at the gauze around my leg. "Your old man's kind does. You took from them. They'll take from you. A wolf never forgets. You're just rabbits now, and there's nothing left to do for a scared bunny. But to run. We took the bag Otto prepared for us, and left his shop. We didn't go back to the house and wait for our aunt, though. We rode our bikes to the outskirts of Fagan County and hitched a ride at the Crispy Chicken. They caught up with us in St. Louis 3 years later. I buried Lisa behind a city park. I rest in one place until I hear the bays of the pack on those bright, moonlit nights, and then I disappear onto another stretch of asphalt, always moving, always staying ahead of the wolves, always ready to remind them that rabbits have teeth too. The Lady in the Germ Box by Killian Crane. It's too hot, Greg thought. He and the other poor kids sat in Squirrel Lodge, packed like rats in fold-out chairs. Some of the rats laughed. Some of them cried. BO fumes and chocolate breath stagnated in the air. Greg doubted he could take this for 2 weeks. The head camp counselor, Marty Hartman, took to the stage. His mustache wriggled as he checked something off of his clipboard. "All right, kids," he exclaimed. "Let's play the quiet game as I give you the Camp Tomatachi safety talk." It was all Greg's parents' fault. His father, a pro golfer, won a big tournament and used the money to get his helicopter license. His parents went on an awesome helicopter trip around Europe, while he was forced to learn the importance of rules or whatever for 2 weeks. He was ready to go home. Greg didn't listen as Marty droned on about emergency exits and procedures. He was caught in a game of cat and mouse, digitally. His fingers danced over the portable game system he held, making his avatar dash across a bridge. A giant fish chased him, mouth gaping. If he could just get the star over the water, he wouldn't have to worry about that stupid fish at all. He could sprint all the way to the end. It came down to one single jump. Someone bumped him hard on the shoulder and his avatar misstepped. He fell into the water, paddling like mad, but in the end, he was pulled down to a watery grave. "Ugh," he grunted as the infamous game over music played. "What the heck?" He turned to see Russell smiling nefariously down at him. Russell had a fire-red mullet and was twice the size of any kid in the room. "Pay attention to the assembly," the fathead said, sitting back and enjoying himself. When Greg's parents had dropped him off, they'd made a fatal error. They'd arrived in the family's luxury SUV. As Greg brought his things to the cabin, a large, chalky hand stopped him. It was said fathead. "Hey, was that your ride?" "One of them," Greg corrected. "We have 5. The fathead smiled, his pasty face somehow darkening. "Oh, we're gonna have some fun, you and I." Marty raised a finger. "Before we continue, I will stress to you children, absolutely no pranks and or bullying will be tolerated here at Camp Tomatachi." Something told Greg that the fathead behind him would be breaking those 2 rules, most likely breaking them over his head. Marty did a cartwheel. "Let me introduce you to our camp counselors." There were 5 underlings total, all of them big kids, probably high schoolers, and probably losers if they were here and not doing cool kid stuff. Greg didn't bother learning their names. The only person he wanted to get to know was that blonde girl over there. Natalie, he thought her name was. Boy, was she something. Girls had cooties and whatnot, but Natalie seemed different. Her hair was like strands of gold, and her emerald eyes could start wars. She was walking, talking treasure. Greg just had to know, what was her deal? "Give it up for our squirrel counselors," Marty shrieked, clapping madly. Greg gave a golf clap, the one his mother used at his father's tournaments. As Marty droned on about how much fun they were all going to have, there was a tap on his arm. It was the kid next to him. He had thick glasses and scraggly hair. "I'm Simon," he whispered. Simon Biles, from upstate. First time on the yard? The yard? Greg asked low. Yeah, Simon said. You know, the yard, that's slang for prison on TV. Ah, Greg said, nonplussed. Yeah, first time. Simon smiled, pushing up his glasses. This makes year 3 for me. The rents just don't trust me around the house while they're gone. Want to be bunkmates? Year 3, Greg thought. This guy looked like he could use a friend, and Greg could use some information. He nodded at the blonde girl, possibly named Natalie. What's her deal? Simon's eyebrows danced. That's Natalie Carver. Real looker, huh? She's queen bee around these parts, sure to get the leading lady role of this year's stupid play. Greg was intrigued. Play? Simon nodded. Every year we put on a play for our parents the day they pick us up. Marty says it shows that we learned about teamwork and dedication, but I think he's trying to live out some fantasy through us. And you think Natalie will be in this play? We'll all be in it, Simon said. It's mandatory, but yes, she'll probably get the leading part. Greg could feel himself coming down with a case of the acting bug. Where there was a leading lady, there was a Prince Charming opposite her, and possibly a kiss. It was clear that Simon was a wealth of information. Greg wondered what else he could tell him about the camp, and more importantly, Natalie. Greg put out his hand. You got a deal, bunkmate. Sweet, Simon said, and they shook on it. When Marty finally finished the squirrely safety talk, he announced that they would all have hot dogs for dinner, followed by activity sign-up. But first, he neighed, let's all come up on stage for our camp group photo. Cheesy music played. Kids ran to the stage. Greg ran too, stopping next to Natalie. He smiled wide for the camera. Maybe he'd been wrong about this summer camp thing. Maybe this would be the best summer ever. At 7:30 sharp, Marty Hartman's bugle woke the dead. Greg brushed his teeth, thinking about the night before. By pure coincidence, he and Natalie signed up for the same activities, even the same time slots. The play this year was The Wonderful Fairy Tale. According to the script, a witch casts a spell on a beautiful damsel, and only true love's kiss could wake her. Greg would study the script every evening after activities, really getting into the mindset of the prince. He was already rich and handsome, so he was a shoo-in. He couldn't wait to show Natalie how amazing he was at literally everything. He dressed for the day, satisfied with himself. Then he stepped into his shoes and grimaced. Dollops of shaving cream foamed around his ankles. Greg sighed. Everyone else was already outside. His shoes sloshed as he sprinted. A camp counselor raised the flag as Marty slid his bugle away, put his hand over his heart, and led them in the Pledge of Allegiance. Greg couldn't help but look for Russell. He found the fathead was grinning at him. Well, he thought, this isn't going to be good. The week went on much in that fashion. Each time he tried to impress Natalie or even just get her attention, there was Russell to ruin it for him. It didn't matter what sport they played. Dodgeball, volleyball, kickball, basketball, tennis. When Russell was on the serving end, Greg was always on the receiving end. And when Greg had the ball, he had to either get rid of it immediately or be crushed by a stampeding fathead. Sprinkled in between being humiliated at every event, Greg kept discovering little surprises. And every time he discovered them, Russell wasn't far away. Bugs in his backpack, sand in his toothpaste, a toy snake in his nightstand. Worst of all was when he learned that Russell could sew. He'd sewn all of Greg's underwear. Together. He wanted to report all of this to Marty, but he didn't dare give either of them the satisfaction. He just accepted Simon's help getting rid of the evidence and moved on. Bunkmates, Simon would say, and it would genuinely make Greg smile. Greg didn't shirk his studies for the play. In drama class, he was by far the loudest and the most expressive. He knew he was a shoo-in for the prince. He just needed to seal the deal. He couldn't understand why people were laughing, but he was getting a reaction. The evening before auditions, Greg and Simon sat on the sandbar of Lake Tomatachi, talking shop. Simon shuddered. That thing is so creepy. Greg followed his gaze. There was an electric blue porta-potty at the edge of the forest. Marty explained that, because the cabins were so far from the sandbar, they'd installed a blue box in case of emergencies. Greg felt unease, nodding his guts. It was fact those things contained all kinds of sickness and disease, and they stank. No one with any sense would ever use one of them. At least, that's what his mom said. Those things really give me the heebie-jeebies, Greg said. I wouldn't go inside of that thing in 1,000 years. Behind them, a tall fathead with a red mullet burst from the bushes. Really? The heebie-jeebies? He lifted Greg by the shirt, grinning from ear to ear. You don't say. He hauled Greg in the direction of the electric blue germ box. Greg pumped the brakes, digging his bare feet deep into the dirt. His shoes were far behind next to Simon. No, he thought, no, my bare feet can't touch that floor in there. No! Put me down, fathead, Greg shouted. Simon on his heels echoed, Put him down, fathead! Russell backhanded Simon, sending his glasses flying. The boy quickly shuffled to all fours, searching madly for them. Greg tried to put up a fight, but Russell shook him like a sack of marshmallows. His brain careened in his skull, making him see double. The door of the germ box swung open. No! Greg cried. Please, Russell, no! Russell threw him inside and shut the door. Greg kicked and yelled, but it wouldn't budge. He heard Russell laughing as he shoved something against the door, blocking it good. Greg's bare feet touched the floor. Germs, he thought. I can feel the germs between my toes. He screamed. Simon! Help! I'm running for Marty, Greg! No, you don't, snitch. 2 sets of running feet faded away. Whatever trapped him was jammed solid. He wanted to hyperventilate, but he didn't dare breathe. The toxic fumes might kill him. Actually, he thought, it didn't smell too bad. It was relatively clean for what it was, but grime began to seep between his bare toes. What would the prince do, he thought. He raised the toilet lid. Some brave souls had definitely been here already. Waste floated in the blue liquid below. He gagged, slamming it closed. Anger welled inside of him. I wish Russell would just disappear. There was a knock. Greg looked at the door. Maybe someone heard him screaming. Hello? Can you help me? There was another knock. It hadn't come from the outside. It came from the toilet. From under the seat. He hesitated, his heart thudding in his neck. Hello? The knock came again, louder. Greg lifted the lid. There was a woman down there looking up at him. Her long, wet hair knotted in clumps, and her skin was stained a dark blue. She smiled thinly. Hello? Greg wanted to scream, but he couldn't. Her head bobbed out of the toilet bowl into the light. He backed as far away as he could, but they were basically face to face. Who are you? He uttered. The lady cocked her head to one side, and blue liquid ran from her ear. Greg barely kept from losing his lunch. Her voice was soft. I'm the lady of the lake. I heard your wish. Greg was stunned. My wish? The lady nodded enthusiastically. I can help you. Tell me what you wish, and it will be so. Greg thought of his game. Was this his chance to grab the star? With Russell out of the way, he'd have no problem impressing Natalie. Fine, Greg said. I wish that Russell would disappear. The lady smiled, bowed her head, and disappeared with a splash. Marty Hartman opened the door, holding a large board and a pair of boys' shoes. Are you okay, Gregory? Greg wasn't sure how to answer that. We'll see, he guessed. Russell got a stern talking to about why bullying is bad, but by dinner he wasn't in trouble anymore. The fathead smiled at Greg. Greg smiled back. He couldn't help himself. Either he'd gone crazy in the germ box, or, after tonight, Russell wouldn't be a problem. As the bugle woke him, Greg felt wonderful. He looked at where Russell slept. The bed was empty. He got ready fast. There were no bugs in his bag, no snakes in his nightstand, no sand in his toothpaste. When he put on his shoes, there was no shaving cream. The flag was raised, and they said the Pledge of Allegiance. No Russell in sight. As they split into groups, Greg stopped Marty. "Hey," he asked. "Where's Russell?" Marty checked his clipboard. I'm sorry? Who?" Greg blinked. "Russell." Marty checked his clipboard again. "Who?" Greg smiled. "Oh, no one important." That day was amazing. With no fathead interference, he was able to put in some time with Natalie. She didn't seem all that interested in talking. In fact, she seemed to try and avoid Greg, but Greg was confident that that would change soon. At auditions, Natalie killed it, drawing applause from the entire crowd. She was a shoo-in for the part of the damsel. Greg put in the performance of a lifetime. He didn't just pretend to be the prince. He was the prince. Instead of a standing ovation, people laughed. He didn't understand what they thought was so funny. Still, he was confident. That night, he had 2 sloppy joes to celebrate. It wasn't long before Marty posted the roles on the squirrel bulletin board. Bodies buzzed excitedly around the results. Greg couldn't see through them, but it was clear by murmurs that Natalie got the part of the damsel. To his confusion, a lot of people were congratulating Simon. He supposed that Simon got the part he wanted. Borkley, the comic relief. He shoved through the crowd and scanned the list for his name. But there had been some mistake. Simon Biles, the prince, Gregory Gaspard, Borkley. His jaw hit the top of his shoes. How could this happen? Simon, looking dejected, put out a hand to shake. "You gave it hell, bunkmate. You'll be an awesome Borkley." Greg stared at the hand. Shaking, he squeezed a bit harder than he intended. "Congrats, pal." He hid the storm cloud in his heart. He needed to walk, clear his head. And then, the storm cloud had a flash of lightning. Lake Tomatachi. The sandbar. He went straight to the germ box, locking the door behind him. The darkness magnified the smell. He was terrified, but he was out of options. Simon had simply forced his hand. He lifted the lid of the toilet, swatting the fetid air. Tentatively, he said, "I wish I was the lead in the camp play." The stark outline of a head, dripping blue liquid, floated out of the toilet bowl. "Is that so?" Greg swallowed hard. "Yep." Before, when he'd made his wish, she disappeared almost immediately. This time, she lingered, floating ghostly quiet. Greg could hear his breathing. After an eon, she cut the silence. "Anything else?" The words surprised Greg. "Yeah, I suppose. There's this girl, Natalie Carver. I wish she liked me. A lot." She gave a low bow, then disappeared. Greg quickly shut the lid. "Well," he said to no one, "that's that." He crept back to Squirrel Lodge. Among the kids running wild, Simon was talking to Natalie. She was smiling at him. Greg had had enough. He left and went to bed. He tossed and turned for a long time, wrestling with the night's events. When he finally dreamed, he was at one of his dad's golf tournaments. His swing was perfect. The ball plunked into the electric blue germ box. Hole in one. The bugle sounded, and everyone rose to greet the day. Except Simon. A medical emergency was declared. Simon was wheeled out of the cabin by EMS. His glasses dropped from his face, skittering on the ground. Greg picked them up. Simon reached out to him with a red and white striped hand. He was striped like that all over his entire body. "Thanks, bunkmate," Simon said, weakly putting on his glasses. He gave Greg a pitiful smile. Even his teeth were striped. The ambulance doors were shut, and the vehicle roared away. Greg felt genuinely terrible about what he'd done. Until he locked eyes with Natalie Carver. She looked at him in a way that made steam whistle out of his ears. Marty walked up to him, shaking his head and looking at his clipboard. "Sorry to ask like this," he said. "I know he was your friend, but the show must go on. It's what Simon would have wanted. How do you feel about being the prince?" Greg's eyes never left Natalie's. "Yes," he said. "I think Simon would want that." Marty checked something off his clipboard enthusiastically. "Fantastic!" During activities, Greg and Natalie were inseparable. Instead of participating, they doted on each other, laughing at everything the other said. More than once, camp counselors had to separate them. During the afternoon break, they stole away to a secret alcove near Lake Tomatachi, far from camp counselors' eyes. "Oh, Greg," Natalie said, "I don't know what it is about you. You're just so funny." Greg shrugged. "What can I say, m'lady?" Natalie lost it. Greg laughed himself. He was pretty funny. "It's too bad," she moped. "In a few days, I'll have to go back home, and you'll have to go back home, and we'll probably never see each other again." Greg had other plans. They locked eyes for a long time. Never say never. They kissed. It was just one, and it was over fast, but to Greg, it lasted a lifetime. He felt woozy as they rubbed noses. "We better get back," he said. "They'll be looking for us soon." "I know," Natalie said, tittering. "We're so bad." They walked holding hands, the sandbar crunching under their feet. The germ box loomed ahead. "I'll catch up," Greg said. I need to pee." "Oh," Natalie said. "I can wait on you." Don't be ridiculous. I'll catch up." She hesitated, not wanting to move. Then she gave up, pouting. "Fine, but seriously, don't take too long. I'll miss you." She sulked away. Greg went into the germ box and locked the door. "I wish I never had to go home." He raised the toilet seat. She smiled up at him, content not to come up. "You sure about that?" she asked. Greg cleared his throat. "Yes." The lady nodded, then sank into the dirty abyss. That night, Greg's dreams were filled with hand-holding, hugs, and best of all, kisses. He got his star power up. He was unstoppable. No bugle screeched that morning. Instead, Greg was called into Marty's office. He thought maybe he and Natalie were in trouble, but Marty looked too grave for that. "Gregory," he said, tears welling in his eyes. "I really don't know how to say this." Greg grew impatient, ready to spend the day with Natalie, ready for another kiss. "Well, spit it out already." Marty blew his nose. "I'm so sorry. We got a call that your father crashed his helicopter. Your parents are..." Greg sank in his chair. Marty handed him a tissue. Greg looked at it, not sure what to do with it, not sure about anything. Eventually, he was able to speak. I need to go home." Marty winced. "Actually," Greg's eyes went wide. "What?" "Your neighbor called. There was a fire, something electrical. Your house was totally destroyed." Greg laughed, unbelieving. It wasn't a happy laugh. Marty shook his head. "I'm sorry, Gregory. I can counsel you through this. Do you need a hug?" Greg crumpled the tissue in his hand. "No." What am I supposed to do?" "Well, you can stay here. We have everything you need." "No!" Greg shouted. "Now, Gregory," Marty said, "it's lovely in the winter." "This wasn't the deal," he shouted. "She tricked me." Marty's mustache twitched. "Who tricked you?" Greg stormed out. "Gregory!" Marty shouted. "Come back! I'm not finished counseling you!" Greg almost sprinted past the kids saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Natalie seized him by the arm. She had a crazy look in her eye. "Greg, don't you ever scare me like that again. Where were you?" "Get off me!" he yelled, pulling away. Natalie's face went from hurt to fury to pleading to love. "I'll never leave you, Greg. What's wrong? Let me help you." Greg was crying. "Leave me alone!" He ran towards Lake Tomatachi, Natalie close behind him. She was frothing mad. "Greg, don't you run from me! You can't get away from me!" He locked himself in the germ box. She pulled and banged and even headbutted the door. "Get out here so I can help you!" she shouted as her claws scraped down the electric blue plastic. The smell was horrible. Greg lifted the lid, releasing a swarm of flies. "Get out here," he commanded. A face bobbed out of the blue liquid, floating among the waste. It was grinning with thin, sharp teeth. Marty mewled outside. "Greg, come out here. Let me counsel you." The box shook as Natalie assaulted it. He could see her wild eyes through the crack. It wouldn't be long before she pulled the door off the hinges. "Greg!" When Greg turned back to the lady, her head stuck high out of the bowl. She seemed to bulge from under there, barely contained. She was big, he realized. He wondered, with some horror, what she'd look like hauled up on land. Gills ran the length of her serpentine neck. "You called?" "You cheated," he said. "My wish didn't come true." Her blue tongue licked dripping liquids from her lips. "You wished you didn't have to go home." The door flexed, the plastic nearly buckling. His parents, his house, this camp. It was all too much for him. He had to escape. He wanted out. He looked at the lady, his voice a fury. "Get me out of here!" She cocked her head. "Are you sure about that?" Greg gestured behind him. "Yes! I wish I could disappear!" The lady's pupils grew massive. "Very well." Her head lurched forward, biting into his fingers. Shocked, Greg screamed as the needle-like teeth sank into his knuckles. Her gills opened and she blew ultramarine liquid everywhere. Slowly, she slid into the toilet bowl, cackling as she did. Greg pulled and protested, but she wouldn't let him go. He reached for the handle, but he was already too far. He flailed madly as he was pulled into the darkness, into a sea of ultramarine blue. The bowl muffled his screams as he slipped. Marty mewled from the outside. "Greg, let me counsel you!" Natalie screeched. "Greg, let me help you!" The lady slid below the surface, her eyes glowing in the dark liquid. Dread seized Greg as the greasy fluid ran up his arm. He squealed as his grip failed, and he was pulled fully into the bowl with a great splash. Natalie pulled the door off its hinges, throwing it to the side. Greg was nowhere to be seen. She and Marty held their noses as they looked down the open lid just in time to see a grouping of bubbles float to the top. One by one, they popped, and the waste floating on the blue sea grew deathly still.
The Devil Knows Three Chords by John Oak Dalton, a weekly spooky original.
Chester Kilbuck and Bobby Lee Starr were one of the hottest bluegrass duos of the 50s and early 60s, but it all ended in a dumpster behind the Avalon Ballroom in San Francisco in 1968. Like a lot of bluegrass musicians at the time, they started in the Bluegrass Boys in the late 40s and then joined the Foggy Mountain Boys in the early 50s before setting off on their own as Kilbuck and Starr. Chester and Bobby Lee couldn't have been more different, and thus made an unlikely team. Chester was married 3 or 4 times and had several kids that hated him, and several more he wouldn't admit to having and who didn't know he was their daddy. Bobby Lee was still married to his first wife Marion, and they had a son, Johnny, who was born blind in 1946 and who Bobby Lee lived and died for. Chester followed the old ways and the old music, but Bobby Lee saw things differently when his son started playing folk music with a couple of other guys. Bobby Lee wanted to add some more Bob Dylan and Graham Parsons to their song list, but Chester said that would never get them on the Porter Wagoner show, and they would get booed out of the Grand Ole Opry. Bobby Lee got through a lot of his disagreements with Chester by bringing Johnny on the road with him when he was old enough, and Johnny became a great mandolin player in his own right. So in the same way that they wanted to leave Bill Monroe and then leave Flatt and Scruggs, Johnny wanted to forge out on his own. It was the way of things, and Bobby Lee could not deny his son. But his son still needed him. So when Johnny Starr made a deal for his own band with the Avalon Ballroom, which was the premier venue in San Francisco at the center of everything happening in 1968, he might have mentioned his dad would come and play too. The Avalon promised Killbuck and Starr top billing, and Johnny's band Lemon Dirty Fingernails second, ahead of the Stone Ponies and the Lewis and Clark Expedition. Chester was very angry with the deal, but went along with it. And as it happened, Killbuck and Starr killed it in front of all these young people who were turning on to the Bakersfield Sound and the Byrds and Dylan. And suddenly, Bobby Lee could see a future for the duo, a future beyond the long county fair tours, a future beyond waiting for someone to tap their shoulder for the Opry. Bobby Lee waited backstage for his son, who was still out talking to friends, and it was good that he was late because he found out quickly Chester was still fuming. Bobby Lee found, at the little rickety table in the dressing room, his son had left a water bottle with a note that said, "Drink me," and a plate of food with a note that said, "Eat me." It was punched out in Braille with the little stylus and slate both father and son had learned to use. Bobby Lee was drinking down the water when Chester banged the door open. Bobby Lee looked at him with a smile and a squint. "I thought you slipped off with that little gal in the front row in those short shorts," Bobby Lee said. Chester's frown deepened. "Hell, that gal had more armpit hair than I do. You couldn't tell who was the girl and who was the boys with all that long hair out there." "They loved us, Chester," Bobby Lee said. "They should love their goddamn country. Your son's a cripple and has an excuse, but the rest of them boys should be over in Vietnam fighting communism," Chester proclaimed. That killed off Bobby Lee's good feeling. "It'd be nice if you could be happy with one thing in this world," Bobby Lee muttered, but Chester wasn't listening, as usual. "That one hairy SOB that plays with Johnny has a dog he calls Roy a Cuff," Chester added. "He means that with respect, Chester," Bobby Lee said. "You don't name a hound dog after Roy a Cuff," Chester shot back. Bobby Lee shrugged. "These young folks, they got their own thing going on out here," Bobby Lee said. Chester looked at him with narrowed eyes and lit a lucky strike. "They ain't our people, Bobby Lee. Our people are in Oklahoma and Iowa and every little town between there and Nashville. This whole state could fall off into the ocean and good riddance to 'em all." Bobby Lee looked at his partner full in the face. "Johnny is my son, and he's living out here. And he's got a band he calls Lemon Dirty Fingernails. And that ain't a band name, although one word is accurate." Bobby Lee swallowed hard and began to sweat. Bobby Lee wasn't sure, but it looked like the walls were sweating too. "I didn't do what I did to end up playing to a room full of draft dodgers and drug addicts," Chester said. Bobby Lee frowned. "What did you do, Chester?" Bobby Lee thought the flowered wallpaper behind Chester was starting to bloom. Chester looked at him. "You think Robert Johnson was the only man ever met the devil at the crossroads? Blues music is in the roots of the soil, but so is country music. Those roots are even deeper. You don't think a bluegrass man could find his way to those crossroads?" Chester's normally red face, flushed with anger and drink, became even redder. "What do you think is at them crossroads?" Behind him, the flowers bloomed, black. "Do you think what career we have come from good looks and your sweet nature?" Bobby Lee watched a cold smile come across Chester's face, full of yellow teeth. And then, as Bobby Lee watched, A pair of horns began to grow out of his forehead. Chester's voice came in a hard rasp. "Let me ask you another question. You knew me back when we both lived in the Cumberland homesteads up in those mountains. When you'd know my family ever have money for a fiddle? When did you ever see me practice on one when I wasn't already good?" In answer, Bobby Lee picked up the bottle again and smashed it into Chester's face. Chester fell with a growl, and Bobby Lee was on him in a flash, choking him, and after a few moments, Chester's eyes bulged, and the horns receded, and Bobby Lee quit his work. The walls quit sweating and blooming, and Chester looked like a normal person again, and Bobby Lee realized this was going to be hard to explain. So Bobby Lee dragged Chester out the back door into an alley and heaved him up into a dumpster and hoped that was going to be enough. Chester was heavy, and it was slow going as the ground beneath Bobby Lee seemed to buck and heave. Bobby Lee was grateful there wasn't anyone lounging at the mouth of the alley during his work. The crowd had dispersed, and with them, the good vibes, and suddenly the Avalon was just a crumbling old building. He got back into the tiny dressing room just ahead of his son, who came in beaming. "Pops, it was quite a night," Johnny said. Bobby Lee steadied his voice. "It was. I'm proud of you," Bobby Lee said. "Where's Uncle Chester?" Bobby Lee wiped at his brow. "Oh, he found some trouble to get into, I reckon." Johnny nodded, then reached out a hand. "Pops, you're sweating and you sound funny. You drink that water I left for you?" "Sure. Why?" Johnny nodded more seriously and slowly. "I'm sorry. I wanted to get back here sooner. I wanted to go on that trip with you." "What trip?" "I dosed that water, Pops. I thought we could tune in together tonight to celebrate. It looks like you started without me, but I can walk you through the rest of the way. Just remember, everybody here's a friend. This place is full of love tonight." Bobby Lee sat down hard. "You didn't eat the brownies? Cool. You eat one and I'll eat one and we'll be on this trip together. I can see things when I trip, Pops. If you can dig that." Dig was a funny word to Bobby Lee. He had dumped, not dug, a place for Chester to rest. Bobby Lee started laughing. "Pops?" Bobby Lee couldn't stop laughing all night. They got onto the Opry after all when they did a tribute show for Chester Kilbuck. Bobby Lee took Johnny to Nudi's Rodeo Tailors in Hollywood and got matching rhinestone suits for the gig. Earl Scruggs showed up and played with them. Mother Maybelle Carter was there, and so was Doc Watson. Doc Watson brought his son Merle, and Scruggs brought his sons Randy and Gary, and that made it more special for Bobby Lee. Roy Acuff was the MC, and it was just as well nobody in Johnny's band mentioned they had a dog named after him. The summer of love didn't seem to last a summer even. Johnny's band got broken up by the draft after all, and then broken up for good by the Viet Cong and Dien Bien Phu. Some people said the summer of love ended with the violence at Altamont Speedway, with the Rolling Stones and the Hells Angels and everything that went down. Some people pointed to the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and some the killing of Bobby Kennedy. Some even said it ended when a hippie girl tricked Chester Kilbuck into going into an alley with her, where a bunch of her friends cornered him and beat him to death for his take at the Avalon Ballroom that night. The Avalon closed just a few months later and got converted into a movie theater. The first movie they showed was The Love Bug with Dean Jones. Bobby Lee took his son on the road for a short while, but Emmylou Harris called for him to record and tour with her, and once more, Bobby Lee could not deny his son. Chester was 3/4 outlaw, but he was the one with the business sense, and Bobby Lee was the one that always got lost in the music. That is why Bobby Lee felt that if Chester made a deal, he should keep it. So Bobby Lee kept doing the circuit, the fairs and the VFWs, and the high school gyms, and if he was doing a show in a nice small town on a Sunday, somebody would always invite him back to their house for fried chicken. As the years went on, Bobby Lee began to understand more of what might have happened that night at the Avalon Ballroom, but he was never really quite sure. Because if you sing the old songs that people wanted to hear, the gospel and the hymns, you had to believe it. You had to believe it, or the audience would know. When you sang, "Will the Circle Be Broken?" you had to feel that there was a better home awaiting by and by. So if you believed in one place, it only made sense you believed in the opposite place. There had to be an opposite, just like Kilbuck was the opposite of Star. But they only worked their best together. So if Chester Kilbuck had really stood at the crossroads and made a promise, it was better to keep that promise than cross your fingers and hope that none of it was real. Wilson Road by Charles Campbell. There is nothing like a dirt road in the deep South. The dust kicked up by your truck when you race up the hill after a long day of hard work. The occasional deer that looks back at you curiously when you round the corner is a sight to behold. There are snakes that slither across the dirt road to get to the other side of the woods. You will see hawks scoping out prey from the trees as you move down the dirt road. There are many surprises when you go up or down an old-fashioned, in-the-woods, authentic dirt road. I should know. I grew up in a big house at the top of the hill of one of these roads, a road that was named after my family, Wilson Road. There is one story above the many that stands above them all. It was late summer, and my cousin came running up the road. He was out of breath, and it was a night none of us would ever forget. "Danny, you gotta come down the hill," Tanner hollered. He had his hands on his knees, and he sucked in air like no tomorrow. "What happened?" Danny asked as he rose from his seat on the back steps. "I saw something down there. It took off in the woods. Go in the house and get the shotgun real quick," Tanner said, finally catching his breath. "Was it a deer? You know we can't shoot deer with a shotgun," Danny said, and began to sit back down. "Don't get back on your ass. Get in the house and grab the shotgun. It wasn't any deer. I don't know what it was exactly. I just caught a flash of it, but it was big, and it was an animal." "You probably just saw a dog," Danny replied as he turned to open the door. He'd grabbed the Remington that sat just inside the doorway. What the big house was not low on was shotguns. There were a few Winchesters, a couple of Mossbergs, and 4 Remingtons. Danny grabbed the box of shells, and Tanner was waiting for him at the edge of the dirt road. "Come on, I'll show you where I saw it." "I ain't shooting a dog, Tanner. Just telling you that now." "It weren't no dog. Come on." Tanner wasn't a small guy. He was a 17-year-old that had hit his growth spurt at 13. He was 6'3" and still had a little growing left in him. Danny was much smaller in stature by comparison, standing at just 5'6" with a slender frame which made it kind of funny that he was the one in charge of the shotgun. Tanner lumbered down the hill like Sasquatch with Danny following close behind. Tanner pointed. "It was down there near the bottom of the hill, off close to the creek bed." "All right then." Danny racked the Remington and stepped off the dirt road and led the way in front of Tanner. The two of them made their way down the creek bed, and Danny noticed something right off the bat. There was a litany of broken branches lying about. It was as if someone tossed them about haphazardly all over the ground. They were definitely out of place, as the tree line was approximately 15 yards or so from the edge of the creek bed. "You see anybody dumping their sticks down here?" Danny asked Tanner. "No, there ain't no tire tracks. I don't know why they'd lug all these branches down here by foot. It'd be easier to run them over to Langley Dump," Tanner answered. "Well, these limbs didn't magically fly from the trees. We ain't had no big winds in a couple of months at least, and I was down here at the creek 2 days ago, and these weren't here," Danny said. He did a 360 to see if anything else jumped out at him. Tanner acted as if the limbs weren't a big deal. The big deal was the something he swore he saw. I don't know nothing about the stupid sticks, but what I saw was standing about where we are now. You see any prints? Danny asked. Tanner was looking at the ground, looking for that very thing. No, but you know how this ground is. It don't hold prints that good. True, Danny said. Let's walk up the creek a bit. Danny took the lead and Tanner followed. It was going to be dark soon, but the two of them knew these woods better than they knew just about anything else in the world. Keep your eye out for moccasins, Danny warned. Tanner rolled his eyes to signify that Danny must have forgotten who he was talking to. Tanner fancied himself as the Moccasin King. He had so many skins hanging on his walls that he lost count of them. I don't know where it could have gone. We're almost up the old finishing plant, Tanner said. You think it might have went in the plant? Danny asked. Could be. I just got a quick glance before it took off. It was big and dark. You'd think I was going crazy, but I know what I saw, and I ain't smoked any weed in the last week, if that's what you're thinking. That bad shit I got from Frog last time taught me the error of my ways, Tanner said with a nervous chuckle. Yeah, I don't know where he got that shit. He must have grown that out by Langley Pond. It messed you up pretty bad. Glad it didn't kill you, Danny said, and chuckled himself. Darkness was creeping up around them. They could see the lights from the big house, but it was quickly receding. Wish I would have grabbed the flashlight out of my truck, Danny said. You want me to run up there and get it real quick? Tanner asked. No, you about died when you ran up there a little while ago. I'm not telling Nana you died of a heart attack while we chased your fake monster to the finishing plant. You got your lighter, don't you? Yeah. We'll just light a few sticks if we need to. We know our way around here. That we do. There was a crash. It sounded like a boulder was dropped from the second story of the finishing plant. The two of them looked at one another. They knew they were going to find out where the noise came from. Danny broke into a jog and Tanner fell a little behind. The boys came up on the tricky part of the track. They had to cross a narrow pipe on foot. One misstep, and they would go tumbling into the creek below. Danny could walk it in his sleep. Tanner could move quickly across it in the stark light of day, but he took measured steps in the narrow light. He could tell that he would probably have to take the long way back to the hill when they were done at the plant. No way could he balance back across the pipe in complete darkness. Good news is that Danny would take the long way with him. Danny stood at the end of the pipe, patiently waiting on Tanner to finish crossing. He stayed quiet as not to startle his large cousin. All right, let's go, Danny said once Tanner cleared the pipe. The boys walked the grooved path to the old plant. There was a redneck Hansel and Gretel trail of tossed cigarette butts and rolling papers. The abandoned plant was a cool place for the valley kids to break shit. Danny suspected the crashing sound they heard on approach was one or more of those said kids screwing around the decrepit building. And it was probably one of those kids that Tanner saw at the creek bed. The sun was almost fully set with only the last haze disappearing, surrendering the day. It was a good thing they were wearing shoes with heavy soles because the crunch of broken glass under their feet as they got closer to the building was now prominent with every step. The darkness finally enveloped them completely, and the night sky was star-filled with a full moon that provided adequate light. There were no clouds in the sky, and that was good. What the boys didn't need was to be stomping around the inside of the gutted plant with zero visibility. Danny was very good directionally, but complete darkness would definitely test his skill. Let's just stop for a minute and listen, Danny said as he held the shotgun by his side. I think you saw a buck, Tanner. It weren't no deer. I know what a damn deer looks like, Tanner whispered angrily. All right, shh, Danny replied. The boys got quiet and listened. The wind had ceased, and the crickets weren't as noisy. They could hear some of them, but not the overwhelming chorus that was common for this time of the day in this part of the woods. Danny finally broke the silence. Well, Tanner, I ain't going in there unless we hear something. I don't feel like tripping over something and breaking my neck. We can take the main road back. I know you can't cross that pipe now, Danny said. Come on, man. I didn't make it up. Let's wait about 5 more minutes, and if we don't hear nothing, then we can scoot back. Just 5 more, okay? All right, then. 5 more, and then we're out of here, Danny replied. 5 minutes, then, Tanner said, and no sooner did he get the words out of his mouth, there was another loud crash, and it definitely came from the second floor of the plant. Let's go, Danny said flatly. The boys entered the plant from what would have been the back entrance when it was functioning. Now there were entry points everywhere that the walls had crumbled. It certainly wasn't a safe place to be screwing around, especially at night. What remained of the old stairs near the back entrance was a precarious stack of bricks that resembled stairs, but there were chunks missing where you would have to really stretch to reach the next usable step. This wasn't a problem for Tanner, but presented a challenge for the shorter-legged Danny. Let me hold your lighter real quick. Danny motioned for Tanner to hand it over. Danny flicked the bic and carefully took the lead. Tanner stayed close behind so he could grab Danny if he fell backwards. The boys paused when another crash broke the silence. Shit, it's up there all right, Tanner whispered. It's not an it. It's just some kids and they'll piss their pants when they see us coming up there, Danny said. Cuz, I hope you're right. What I saw weren't no kids. Make sure that shotgun is ready, Tanner said. There was no jest in his voice. There was a calm clarity that Danny didn't recognize in his cousin. Tanner was never clear about anything, so this gave Danny some inner pause to hear this unfamiliar tone in his voice. The two of them got to the second floor. Abandoned spindles were spread all around, and the light from the night sky peeked through the many holes and craters in the walls. There were a number of large holes in the floor that would send you on a rapid descent to the first floor if you stepped fully into one. Unintended booby traps that the boys would have to navigate in order to get to the sound source. There was another crash, bricks exploding back in the darkest corner of the second floor. It was completely engulfed in darkness, and Danny was beginning to second-guess their decision to chase Tanner's beast. Maybe it wasn't as imaginary as he'd thought just moments before. It's back there, Tanner said and pointed. He had no reservation in his voice. It was more determination. Determination that they were going to find out what he saw, and if they needed to pump it full of shotgun shells, then so be it. Watch your step, Danny whispered back. Stay close and follow my exact steps. It might still be some kids screwing around back there, and I'm not shooting anything until I can see it. Gotcha, Tanner replied in agreement and understanding. The wind picked up just a bit. The boys got closer to the dark side of the second floor, and there was another explosion of brick against wall. Danny flicked the bic again and held it out in front of him for just a second. He would have to give it to Tanner to hold the shotgun properly, but he wanted to see if anything would reveal itself before they completely walked into the darkness. The boys heard the shuffling of what could have been claws, but they still couldn't see anything. Okay then, Danny said, and handed the lighter back to his cousin. Keep it lit. Danny paused for a couple of seconds, held the shotgun out in front, ready to fire, and hollered out, "Who's back there? Come on out now!" Tanner was steady with the lighter, and his breath was measured. Danny couldn't believe how calm his cousin was. Danny didn't scare easy, but he was beginning to feel something approaching fright, but he fought the urge to be trigger-happy. The boys stepped completely into the darkness, and that's when the red eyes turned to look at them. "Oh shit, shoot it, Danny! You don't need to see it!" Danny fired the Remington into the darkness just below the red eyes. There was a growl of anger that shook the boys to their core. Danny chambered another shell, and it screamed out of the muzzle with nothing but death as its intent. The red eyes were still there, and the beast moved quickly. Danny was in the process of racking the third shell when the barrel of the Remington was sliced in half. The beast was in front of them now. Danny couldn't believe his eyes. It was straight out of the movies. Only, it was so much worse. The creature's eyes were blood red and its canines were bared. It stood a good foot taller than Tanner and twice as wide. It was haunched on its back legs. Tanner and Danny stepped back into the lit part of the plant, and the creature walked toward them. The boys couldn't just turn and run. They would surely step into one of those death traps. They had to back away, slowly, and hope for the best. As they stepped, the creature continued to follow. They should have just left this thing alone in the dark. Finally, the boys got a full-body look at the monster. It was covered in black fur from head to toe. There was burnt hair and scorched flesh from where the shotgun shells found their mark, but did little but really piss this thing off. It had the ears and snout of a wolf. It was a creature of muscle and destruction. It snarled in anger and had a hunger in its eyes. But it also didn't attack. It looked at the boys. Tanner and Danny were silently making their peace with the Lord as the creature was almost on top of them. They were going to die, no doubt about it. Tanner and Danny closed their eyes and wished for a quick death. Danny could feel the hot breath of the creature on his forehead, and then it moved to Tanner. The calmness Tanner displayed just moments before was all gone. He pissed himself. The creature jumped into one of the craters in the floor and disappeared into the woods. Tanner and Danny kept their eyes closed for another minute or two. Tanner was the first one to open his eyes, and he poked his cousin in the back. I think it's gone, Tanner said nervously. Danny opened his eyes. He was still holding the shotgun. The creature had turned it into the sawed-off variety. Let's just wait here for another couple of minutes before we go back out. Just in case he's out there waiting, Danny said. Let's not. If that thing wanted to kill us, he would have. Let's just get out of here, get to the road, get back to the house, and don't say shit to anybody about this. That was a damn werewolf, Danny. Yeah, I wonder what it was doing back in that corner. Well, we are on a need-to-know basis, and we don't need to know. Let's go, Tanner shouted. And that's exactly what the boys did. They went home. They were asleep in their beds when Grandpa climbed up the back of the house and slipped into the attic. He'd transform and be down for breakfast. Grandpa was a good man. He wouldn't kill someone unless he had to. When he transformed, he'd take out some of the deer around his property and then take his aggression out on the many bricks inside of the plant. It was better than ripping out throats and bringing the weight of the world down on his family. Grandpa was happy that the curse had skipped over Tanner. But Tanner's kid, if he ever had them, would be subject to the curse. And maybe that kid would succumb to the animalistic urges of the hunt. Fortunately for the valley, the man that currently lived at the top of Wilson Road did not. Summer Slaycation by David O'Hanlon. The plan is simple, Henry Stout said around the butt of his cigarette. We take the canoes across the lake and into the cypress maze, and then it's just a short hike to the Miniwinion bunkhouses. What if we get lost? Lance Calavera snatched the smoke from Henry's mouth. It's called the maze for a reason. Henry scratched at the patch of bristly hair he called his beard. I've done the maze 3 times. I can get us through. Henry was on his 4th stay at the Living Grace Rehabilitation Camp for youth offenders. The 13-week camp was developed by Pastor Frank Oppendecker to put kids on the straight and narrow through Christ. If that didn't work, the former Marine Corps drill instructor had more inventive ways to grind the little pukes into productive members of society. The Cypress Maze was the final test for all the teens that entered the program. If they failed, they completed their sentences in a juvenile detention center. It was a one-time deal. Normally. Father O, as the delinquents called him, took a special interest in Henry and brought him back every time he reoffended. He saw Henry as the camp's one and only failure. Henry saw the camp as a grueling but welcomed reprieve from his home, a dilapidated trailer park outside of Russellville called the Green Mile. "Yeah, you've done the maze," Lance said, "but not at night." "Then stay here," Henry threw his hands in the air. "Maybe Father O will let you polish the pews for morning service. The rest of us are going to the Mini-Winnions. And then we'll see." Ted Vang cupped both his hands to his chest, as if cradling breasts. "Seriously, Ted?" Dexter Brown shook his head. "With those glasses, you can see them from here." "Too many trees in the way." Ted adjusted his glasses over his plump cheeks. "Ted's right," Henry smirked. "The senior house is responsible for bed checks and lockdown, so they hit the showers last. That's when we'll strike. We throw the bombs through the windows, and they'll all come out running." Dexter held up the Polaroid camera. "And I'll get the photos to make sure we all get a good look and don't miss out on anything." "What about the counselors?" Jimmy O'Reilly, always the pragmatist, asked. "They're going to come running too. These babies aren't exactly subtle." Jimmy tossed one of the devices between his hands. It wasn't much bigger than a thermos, with a main body of papier-mâché over chicken wire with 4 thinner cardboard tubes attached to the sides. A waterproof fuse snaked from the top of all 4 and came together in a braid with that of the main device. The entire package was wrapped in black electrical tape for easy concealment on the moonless night. Jimmy's unsettling interest in things that went boom were what landed him in the camp. "Spaz will take care of that," Henry reassured them. Marco Spaz Reynolds tugged at the ends of his shaggy mane and rocked in place, giggling. Yeah, I got something to keep those pesky counselors out of our business." Father O handpicked all the campers. He wanted to challenge himself as much as the youths. Whether it be Henry's seeming inability to rehabilitate, Ted's obesity, Dexter's unwillingness to apply his genius IQ, Jimmy's authority issues, or Lance's temper, each of the 6 teens offered him a chance to prove his faith. Spaz was no different. He grew up in a satanic cult that were currently all facing charges of kidnapping and cannibalism. There was no evidence that Spaz had been involved in the cult's crimes, but it didn't matter. He was still a devout devil worshipper. The raised flesh of a pentagram branded on his forehead made Spaz a poster child for the program, if Father O could reform him. "Okay," Lance said, "let's stop talking about it and get moving." He grabbed one of Jimmy's devices. "No one gets hurt, right?" "Maybe their feelings," Jimmy shrugged. "It's all smoke and sparks and some little pops, just enough to make them think there's a fire." The 6 boys made their way to the door of the cabin, and Dexter poked his head out first. The pastor's cabin was dark in the distance, opposite the oppressive structures of the obstacle course. Dexter nodded the all clear, and they eased through the screen door one after the other, careful not to let the rusted spring slam it shut. The rubber band of Ted's slingshot twanged softly, followed by the unavoidable pop of a light bulb shattering. Jimmy stretched his neck to watch over the bush for Father O's lamp to come on. When it didn't, he tapped Ted's shoulder. The portly Mongolian fired another stone at the second light positioned over the rack of canoes. Shards tinkled off the fiberglass bodies of the little boats. The boys sprinted across the open lot and quickly loosed 3 of the canoes. They carried them overhead just like the pastor made them on their morning marches. The boats hit water, and the teens paddled gently into the lake. On the other side of the lake, the lovely ladies of the Mini-Winnion Girls' Retreat would be working diligently to finish their nightly duties. Then they would head to the showers. Their bare flesh was a siren song sang between the horrid cries of frogs, crickets, and cicadas. The 6 boys increased their rowing without saying a word. They were at the mercy of their loins, which spurred them faster into the low fog that shrouded the mouth of the cypress maze. Spaz held the narrow trunk of a smaller cypress to keep the canoe still as Jimmy urinated over the aft. Henry and Ted shared the lead boat and panned their flashlights around wildly. Lance and Dexter rowed past them and deeper into the maze. Glad you know the way, Henry, Lance said. This is the right way, Henry responded. I marked the trees the last time I went through the stupid thing. We already made it to the second marker, which means the third should be right here. That's the halfway point. You've been looking for the mark for 20 minutes, Dexter reminded him. The girls will already be dried off by the time we get there. They'll still be naked, though, Ted reassured them all. A sudden splash broke up their debate and was immediately followed by a profane cry and another dynamic entrance into the marsh. The 4 teens turned their lights in the direction of the commotion. The red bottom of the canoe was facing up and rocking in the turbulence. The lights danced over the surface of the water and converged on the face-down body that drifted away from the boat, lazily. Oh, damn! Dexter went to work with his oar, rowing them backwards. Hold on, Jimmy, we're coming. The canoe must have come down on him when it flipped. Lance rowed harder and panned his head-mounted light wildly. Where's Spaz? Get him out of the water! Henry twisted in his seat. There's gators out there. Why are we out here in the dark if there's gators? Ted gripped his oar like a spear and gazed at the black void around them. They hunt at night. Lots of things hunt at night. The bank of halogen lights illuminated the teens and everything in a 60-foot path. Dexter pulled Jimmy's unconscious body across the canoe. Behind the glare of the bulbs, a silhouette stalked across the deck of a camouflaged airboat. The form of some strange malevolence moved behind him and slipped over the side, disappearing into the water. Ted stood quickly, swinging the paddle over his shoulder like a club. Who are you? Ted took a step back, rocking the boat hard. Henry leaned forward to the other side to steady them. Get out of here, mister. Our counselor's out here with us. The good pastor is sound asleep, the shadowy figure said. Don't struggle too much. I don't want you hurting yourself. Something broke the surface beside Lance and Dexter. A pair of malformed green-brown appendages reached up and twisted in Jimmy's clothing. His body slipped back into the marsh. Dexter and Lance grabbed his legs and struggled to pull him back in. The tug-of-war intensified with the heavy rocking of the canoe. Jimmy's legs were completely submerged, then up to his ribcage. Suddenly, the boys were airborne. They popped their heads above the filthy water, coughing and rubbing their eyes clear. Jimmy bobbed beside them. They reached for him in unison. They screamed that way, too, when the bisected body of their bunkmate tipped over and sank into the abyss. Dexter watched in horror as Ted and Henry were knocked into the marsh. A net sailed from the airboat over them, and something beneath the surface gathered it, dragging it back to the man hiding behind the lights. Lance disappeared with a quick splash. Dexter swam as hard as he could. He didn't care if he was swimming toward camp or the Mississippi, just so long as he was swimming anywhere that wasn't the cypress maze. Something snagged his shirt. He felt the barbs dragging through his flesh, but forced himself onward. Then, he was underwater. And he wasn't alone. The house sat on a tiny island in the back of the bayou away from prying eyes. Sawgrass obscured the boundaries where land met swamp and the tiny dock at which the airboat rocked sedately. The ramshackle 3-story was built shortly after the Civil War and abandoned for almost as long. Portions of the roof sagged, and others had collapsed long before and were patched with tarps. Glass was long gone from the windows and the breeze whistled across the edges of the century-old shards that remained. 2 rusted water tanks had been converted to hold gasoline for the generators, and 3 windmills provided the rest of his electricity. The owner stretched his aching limbs. The isolated home was the perfect location for the laboratory and the clandestine aims of his research. It was not so easy on his ailing body, however. He wrung his arthritic hands and worked the blue nitrile gloves over them with a pair of sharp snaps. He checked his reflection in a grimy mirror. Its surface shook with the constant rumbling of the generators. He'd forgotten surgical masks on his last trek into town. Not that it would matter once the procedure was complete. He adjusted the paper cap over the few remaining patches of vomit-yellow hair and the unfortunate results of the last treatment. He would succeed soon. It was a shame the one boy was torn in half, but science came with losses. No one cared how many monkeys got vivisected in the name of medical advancement. Teenage boys were just as abundant and equally expendable. One of them was advancing at an exponential rate already. The previous summer's campers were failures, but they did get him closer to his goals, and he was certain that this was his year. He wiggled a tooth in its socket with his tongue. It clacked off the floorboards next to his feet. If he didn't succeed this year, there wouldn't be enough left of him for another harvest. He padded up the stairs, feeling each step rattling his fragile bones. The boy in the suspension tube was showing amazing cellular response. The other had not been so compatible. The doctor watched 2 of his previous failures dragging the corpse to the window to push it over the sill. A splash let him know they'd made their shot. The 2 creatures slapped each other's backs wildly and screeched with excitement. Baboons were so easily pleased, even ones that weren't entirely monkey anymore. The 3 remaining teens awaited their first rounds of injections on the reclined gurneys that served as surgical tables. The chubby Asian boy was sobbing while the other 2 observed the room quietly. The doctor found their calm unsettling and busied himself with turning up the isotope saturation of the suspension tube. The disfigured teen floated in the irradiated solution beneath the glow of ultraviolet lamps that shimmered between the lily pads floating at the top of the tube. The doctor tapped the glass until the boy's eyes opened. "You are a marvelous creature," the doctor said. His 2 servants bounded closer to him. Leaves pressed through their green-gray hairs with coiling vines dangling from their aged faces like unkempt beards. They were his first successes and his only companions. The doctor patted their heads. "Go feed your siblings. They may not be necessary after tonight." He leaned in and kissed the suspension tube. "We may finally have what we need." Frank Oppendecker dragged the inflatable boat onto the island's shore. His boys were missing, and there were 2 places they could go. With no disturbances at the Mini-Winion camp, that only left the creepy house in the middle of the swamp. Something splashed behind him, and he cocked the shotgun slide to remind the mysterious owner to stay away. It did. Father O crept through the house, thankful for the drone of the generators masking his creaking ascent to the second floor. He pressed the walnut stock of his weapon tight into his shoulder and swiveled around the doorway into the lab. 3 of his campers were strapped down. Another man stood with the back of a filthy lab coat turned toward Father O. He inched into the room, scanning the abundance of shadows left by the inadequate illumination of the strands of Christmas lights overhead. Lance's face stretched into a smile as he saw the pastor coming in to save them. He quickly wiped the look away before the doctor could see it. "Where are the others?" Father O asked. The doctor turned slowly. Warped earthen tendrils stretched from corrupted flesh and wiggled in the air. Beneath the lab coat was nothing but liver spots and deep purple veins broken up by the abominations of the doctor's self-experimentation. Tiny leaves sprang where normal men grew hair, and bright red flowers opened to sniff the air. "You never come to visit anymore, Francis." The doctor ambled closer to Father O with his arms outstretched. "I mean it, Dad. You can't take all of them." Frank lowered his weapon. "I thought your experiments were running amok again. I should have known it was your gluttonous zeal for this blasphemous perversion." "Dad?" Dexter tried to sit up, but the straps binding him to the table just turned it into an awkward twitch. "Father O, what's he talking about?" The pastor ignored him. The doctor pinched the embroidered pocket of his coat and wiggled it in the direction of Dexter. "Dr. Werner Oppendecker. I'm sorry. I should have introduced myself sooner." Werner turned to his son. "Does it make life easier, Francis, going through it blindly accepting magic instead of reaching for obtainable knowledge in the realms of science?" "Save me the Thanksgiving disappointment debate, Dad. Cut them loose." He jerked a thumb toward the suspension tube. "You can keep that one, but these 3 are going with me. Where are the other 2? "Dead, I'm afraid. And you're not taking my subjects. I'm too close this time, Francis. I've destroyed my cancers, though with unfortunate side effects. These hooligans that you brought me will take the procedure to a level that will end all human suffering." "Human?" Lance grunted. "Humans don't grow lilies on their skin, you nutjob. You're not human." "And our ancestors were not apes." Werner turned, and the woody tendrils reached out to caress Lance's face. "They were more, and so shall we be. I am no longer just a man." Werner twisted away, letting the appendages scratch Lance's cheeks as he made his way to the tube. He slapped the glass. Evolution is an undeniable reality, and I have harnessed it. Human and plant will come together to create a human that never ages and is immune to all of our horrible diseases." "Meat and veggies all in one dish?" Dexter said. "Sounds pretty crazy to me. Don't you think so, Ted?" Ted cried louder in response. "I think he agrees," Lance said. "I'm not screwing around, Dad." Father O raised the shotgun to his hip. "I'm taking the boys back with me." "I knew you'd say that." Werner smiled as best he could with so few teeth remaining. "You should have paid more attention in school, son. Plants communicate with pheromones." The floor collapsed under him and the shotgun boomed as he fell through. The shrieks of the two baboons mingled with Father O's screams until they were the only sound remaining. Lance stared at the mad scientist clutching the tight cluster of buckshot holes in his abdomen before he toppled over. Werner's face splashed into the pool of water streaming from the holes in the blood-splattered suspension tube. The glass spiderwebbed around them. Fissures raced along the surface until the weight of the fluid tore the pieces away in a fantastic crash of falling glass and rushing water. He struggled to get a hand free of the straps while the mad scientist screamed at the disaster. Success. Lance quickly undid the buckles across his torso and proceeded to free Dexter. They worked in tandem to release Ted, who immediately curled into a fetal position. "I want to wake up, now," he cried. "I'm sorry I tried to look at the girls. I just want to wake up." "We don't have time for this." Lance slapped Ted's cheek with no result aside from a raised handprint. "Come on, Ted. We have to run, now." "Better idea." Dexter kicked the brakes on the gurney's wheels. "That works. Now let's get out of here." They pushed Ted toward the doorway as fast as the rusted, squealing wheels would roll. One of the plant monkeys sprang through the hole in the floor and blocked their path. Its mossy-covered lips peeled away from piercing fangs. Lance slid like he was stealing home base and kicked it back into the hole. The creature's terrified shriek was replaced with Lance's own as gnarled root-like fangs dug into his leg. The second beast emerged from broken floorboards. Tiny buds bloomed among its stiff hairs, revealing snapping floral mouths full of adhesive fuchsia fingers. Even the plant-based parts of the monstrosity hungered for flesh. It launched itself out of the hole and straddled him. The creature tried to pulp Lance's skull and narrowly missed. Dexter seized it by the thick coat of its back, only to be attacked by the miniature mouths hiding there. The plants tore into his hands and held him tight while the baboon's jaws snapped inches from Lance's throat. A horrible, chaotic orchestra of howls, shrieks, and unintelligible shouting played below their battle. "I'm sorry, guys." Ted Vang rolled from his stretcher and darted for the window. "I just wanted to see boobs." The towering green form lumbered across his path. Twisting vines of inching-long thorns hung like living dreadlocks around its verdant face. Scales of bark sprouted along the angular jaw and, in the center of the thing's forehead, was the raised lines of a pentagram. Ted held his arms up defensively. "Spaz? Is that you? It's Ted. We're friends. Right, bud?" "Right," Spaz hissed, before his new hair ensnared the portly camper. Spaz's chest opened with a sticky slurp and he jerked Ted into the maw head first. Spaz snapped around to the remaining campers as they fought with the baboon. He stomped toward the fray. Things just got worse. Dexter slammed a knee into the monkey's tailbone and tore a hand free. Lance held the creature's jaws apart with his face caught between them. "Not from down here, they haven't. Kill this stupid thing!" Spaz's foot connected with Dexter and sent him and the abomination thudding into the wall. "Shit," Lance stared up at Spaz. Things just got worse. Lance rolled away as the thorns scoured the floor in a vain effort to seize him. He pulled the gurney between him and Spaz. Ted's legs kicked soundlessly as his head and torso dissolved inside Spaz's new form. The man-plant's lips contorted in malevolent joy. "I've always enjoyed the taste of human," it growled. "Yeah, well, I've always hated vegetables." Lance grabbed Ted's leg and jumped down the hole. Spaz caught himself on the broken boards and Lance dangled from the leg of his slowly digesting fellow camper. The first floor was a demolition site. The busted cages lined the walls. Malformed freaks ran amok, tearing apart the home and each other. Father O, what was left of him, limped through the madness, freeing more of the doctor's failed experiments. Lance dropped the rest of the distance and picked himself up with a groan. Something that might have been a raccoon snarled at him, and he booted it across the room. Its mossy body bounced next to Father O's shotgun. Spaz came crashing down beside him, with Dexter on his back. The teen winked at Lance, and then jumped off the writhing beast. "Let's get out of here," Dexter said, as he ran for the door. Detour first. Lance dashed for the weapon and joined him on the front porch. They watched some of the creatures swim away from the tiny island. Others simply disappeared beneath the placid surface of the swamp. Lance twisted and saw the oblong, rust-covered tanks next to the house. He raised the shotgun and fired it until it clicked on the empty chamber. Gasoline spurted from the wounds, but the tanks didn't explode. Dexter raised an eyebrow and shrugged. It's the thought that counts. It always works in the movies, Lance pointed at the airboat. Let's go. The two teens untied from the mooring and turned on the motor, watching the oversized fan spin without any sort of guard. The doctor cared as much for safety as he did for medical ethics, it seemed. Dexter laughed and held up a plastic box with big block letters. Emergency Signal Kit. Lance took the case and opened it quickly. Finding the flare gun inside drew an excited whoop from him. Bet it blows up now, Dexter said. He moved them away from the dock gently as he got the hang of the controls. The boat rocked hard and the boys spun to see Spaz climbing over the side to join them. Dexter jumped from the controls and body-checked him before he could get his balance. The fan blades caught the vines and diced them. Lance and Dexter exchanged glances. Dexter ducked under Spaz's swinging fist and dropped to the deck behind him. Let's toss this salad, Dexter shouted. Lance jumped over the steering column and kicked Spaz with both feet, sending him careening over the prone Dexter and into the fan. Spaz's mulched remains sprayed behind the boat as his body passed through the oversized food processor with ease. Let's toss this salad? That was the best you could come up with? Lance laughed. Dexter scooped the flare gun and slapped it against Lance's palm. Shut up and burn the house down already. Gladly, Lance sat up and fired at the tanks. They watched the fire spread through the tall grass. It moved placidly until it met the dried, ancient timber of the house. The structure flared like a match head, spreading its light across the black water. Somewhere in the swamp, a baboon cried out as it watched its home burn. Think the girls have taken a shower yet? Lance asked. Probably. Dexter turned the steering wheel. Can't hurt to double check. The fuel tanks exploded behind them, but they didn't bother looking back. Dexter sped up, maneuvering through the bayou. The experiments were loose, but at least the doctor wouldn't be making any more. They would tell the authorities what happened. Eventually. There were more pressing matters to attend to first. They smiled through the blood and grime and aimed the boat toward the cypress maze.
Well, my spookies, I hope you enjoyed the scary tales I've brought for you on this summer fun day. I hope you're having a safe time, and I hope if you happen to lose any appendages this holiday weekend, it's due to fireworks and not, well, whatever it is that goes bump in the night. So make sure you're subscribed because we have so much more fear coming right at you. See you next time.